Before we dive into the next exciting story, drop a comment below and let me know, what time is it where you're watching from? I'm curious to see where everyone's tuning in from around the world. I tried to shake the feeling once I got back on the highway, rolled down the window, let the wind whip across my face. I told myself the worst was over, that maybe we were just overtired, too deep in the wild, letting the silence of the backcountry mess with our heads. But as the pines blurred past and Glacier faded into the mirror, something in me tightened, like I'd left a piece of myself behind, or maybe I hadn't come back alone. I didn't tell Lucy or Tom everything. They didn't need to know how I'd stood outside the RV that last night, convinced I saw something watching us, tall, motionless, halfway between the trees. I told myself it was just a tree trunk, a trick of shadows. But deep down, I knew better. The kind of knowing you feel in your chest before your brain ever catches up. We spent a few days outside Kalispell trying to decompress. Showers, warm food, cell service. It all helped. But one night, while we sat around a fire at a packed RV park just off Flathead Lake, the conversation drifted. Camp stories, wild animal encounters, strange things seen on solo hikes. That's when a guy across the fire, older, gray beard, military posture, started talking about Glacier. "You ever notice how quiet it gets up there?" he asked, leaning in just a bit too far, the firelight dancing in his eyes. Not like normal quiet, like the woods are holding their breath. I didn't respond right away. I just nodded slowly. He noticed. "Something got you up there?" he asked, not in a mocking way, more like he already knew the answer. "Something not quite right?" I could have laughed it off, but I didn't. I couldn't. That kind of question comes from someone who's been through it too. He didn't offer explanations, just sat back and said, "That place don't like noise, don't like people who don't listen." After that night, I stopped trying to explain it away. The forest hadn't just been a setting, it had been alive, watching, testing, waiting for a crack in our confidence. Lucy left a day early, had to get back to Missoula for work. Tom stuck around one more night, but even he seemed changed, a little quieter, more thoughtful. We hugged goodbye with that unspoken understanding that something had shifted between us, something unnameable. I was alone again. And for some reason, instead of heading straight south or east like I'd planned, I turned the RV north back toward the edge of the park. It wasn't a conscious decision, more like a pull, something unfinished. Some part of me needed to look again, not out of curiosity, but out of respect. Maybe even apology. I didn't go deep this time. No logging roads, no secluded meadows, just a simple pull-off at the edge of the Flathead National Forest where I parked beneath a stand of old pines and walked a short loop trail before dusk. The air was still, crisp, that unmistakable scent of pine needles crushed underfoot mixed with something else, something faintly sweet and sour like rotting berries. It wasn't enough to scare me, not quite, but it was enough to remind me that I wasn't in charge here. I didn't stay long, just enough to feel the ground under my boots again, to stand in the hush and say, quietly, just to myself, "I hear you." On the way back to the RV, I passed another camper, a young woman, maybe early 30s, hiking solo with a heavy pack and calm, clear eyes. We nodded to each other in that way seasoned travelers do. But she paused. "Did you see the cairns?" she asked. I shook my head. "What cairns?" She pointed just off the trail. "Somebody's been building them. Not trail markers, just stacks, off in the woods, too far from the path to be practical." I followed her gaze but saw nothing. Still, my gut churned. She must have noticed the change in my face. "Creeped me out too," and she said with a dry smile. "I'm moving on after tonight." I didn't sleep well. I kept thinking about those cairns, man-made piles of rocks, harmless on their own, sure, but out there, off-trail, far from any logical reason, they're a message, or a boundary. Something primitive in us still understands. This is not yours. Don't cross. At 2 a.m., I sat upright in bed, not because I heard anything, but because I didn't. Not even wind, no night birds, just a silence so total it felt like the forest was pressed up against the RV's walls, holding its breath again. I waited like that for maybe an hour, not moving, not daring to look out the window, and then, like a tide slowly retreating, the sounds came back. A breeze, the whisper of needles above, a single owl call, low and distant. I didn't see anything that night, but I knew it had passed close, whatever it was, whatever calls that place home. By morning, I was back on the road, Southbound this time. For real. And yet, even now, when I drive late at night through the wooded roads of Oregon or Colorado or Tennessee, I still find myself glancing into the trees a little longer than I should, listening for the pause in the wind, watching for the hush that means something old and patient is near. I used to think the wilderness was something you conquered, something you braved, but Glacier taught me the truth. You don't conquer places like that. You survive them. You respect them. And if you're lucky, you leave with your soul a little more intact than when you arrived, because there are places in this country, beautiful, vast, holy places where nature doesn't just exist, it remembers. The thing that rattled me the most wasn't what I saw in the woods, it was how it changed what I believed about safety, about rules, about how much control we really have when we park our rigs in the middle of nowhere, put our faith in thin walls and LED lanterns, and pretend the wild respects our convenience. Before Glacier, I used to think I was prepared. I had the checklist. I had the gear. I even had the mindset, or so I thought. Always planned ahead, trusted the maps, trusted my instincts. But no one teaches you how to handle that moment when your instincts turn against you, when it's not your rational brain that senses something's wrong, but your bones. I didn't talk about it publicly at first. What could I say? I camped in a national park and felt watched by something ancient and silent and real. Who would believe me? I'd become the campfire story I used to laugh at. So instead, I stayed quiet, took smaller trips, stayed closer to people. I spent more nights at populated RV parks close to town, places with asphalt pads and firewood bundles stacked neatly outside the office. I told myself I needed a break from the backcountry. But the silence followed me. Not the bad kind, not always. Just a wait, a reminder. Like the forest had marked me. Not as a threat, not as prey, but as someone who'd been let go, like a test had been given and I'd barely passed. It wasn't until months later, parked in New Mexico at the edge of the desert, dry wind rattling the awning and the stars stretching wide above me, that I finally spoke about it. I'd been drinking coffee with an older couple parked a few spots down. Seasoned RVers. They asked about my favorite national park, and without even thinking, I said, Glacier. They smiled, said they'd heard it was beautiful, but never made it that far north. You should, I said, then paused, but only if you're ready for it. They looked at me, curious. I could have changed the subject, but I didn't. I told them a little. Not the full weight of it, but enough. Enough to see a flicker of recognition in the old man's eyes. He'd been there too. Maybe not Glacier, but somewhere. We didn't need to explain the details. Some people understand it without needing proof, because sometimes the proof is what you feel in your chest, that cold pressure. That sense that you've been measured and found wanting and then given mercy. That's the kind of lesson that sticks with you. That's the kind of fear that teaches you how to really see the land you move through. Not as your playground, not as your backdrop, but as something alive. I've returned to the wilderness since then. Carefully, respectfully. And every time I do, I carry that night in Glacier with me. I still hike, still boondock, but I do it differently now. I pay attention to the trees that grow too still. I notice when the birds go quiet. I leave offerings at trailheads sometimes, just small things, a stone, a folded note. Not because I expect protection, but because I understand now that permission is not a given. And I share this story not to scare you away from the wild, but to warn you that awe and terror sometimes walk hand in hand. And if you're lucky, you'll meet both and walk away wiser. If you're not, you'll think it was just the wind. But it's not the wind that stays with you months later when you're alone in your rig, parked beneath quiet pines in another state, another forest. It's the stillness. That exact stillness from Glacier. The kind that feels like it's not just around you, but inside you now. And in that stillness, something shifts. It's hard to explain unless you've been out there long enough to know what a truly empty silence feels like. Not peaceful, not serene, but vacant. The kind that drains the color out of the trees and makes even the creak of your own steps sound like they don't belong. That's what Glacier did to me. It pulled the curtain back. You don't walk into that kind of place and leave the same. People think national parks are preserved for beauty, for protection, but I've come to believe places like Glacier are protected for us, not the other way around, because something old lives out there. and it doesn't need fences or signs to keep you out. Just silence, just a feeling. And if it wants you gone, you'll leave, one way or another. There was a moment, months after I came back, when I was parked at a tiny campground in Wyoming, far from Glacier, far from the cold breath of that northern wind. I'd started a small fire, nothing big, just a few logs crackling while I watched the stars through the trees. It was one of those rare nights where everything felt right again. Safe, still. Then I heard it. A branch snapping, deliberate, a single sound. And every hair on the back of my neck stood up like ice had touched it. Not because I thought I was in danger, but because my body remembered. The breath, the silence, the trees watching. I never saw anything that night, but I didn't need to. I banked the fire, went inside the rig, and I didn't sleep, but I didn't panic either. I just listened, because that's what Glacier taught me, to listen, to wait, and to respect what doesn't make itself seen. You see, the scariest campgrounds in America aren't the ones with legends or ghost stories or warning signs posted at the entrance. The scariest ones are the ones that look the most beautiful, the most untouched, the ones that make you think you've discovered something hidden. But nature doesn't hide from us. It tolerates us. And when it's done tolerating, you'll know. So now, when people ask me where they should go, what's the best RV campground, the most majestic views, the most unforgettable nights, I tell them Glacier. But I also tell them this. Don't go there thinking you're the main character. Don't go there thinking the land owes you anything. Go there quiet. Go there humble. Go there ready to leave with less certainty than you arrived with. Because the real horror isn't what you might see in the dark. It's realizing that something saw you first, and it decided, for reasons you'll never understand, to let you go. The mist rolled in quicker than I'd expected, but I didn't mind. I loved the fog, loved the way it muted everything, softened the edges of the world, made it all feel a little more mysterious. It was perfect for my project. Whispers of the Wild was going to be my best work yet. I could feel it after everything I'd been through in the past year. Hell, in the past month. This was the reset I needed. Just me, my camera, and the Smoky Mountains. No one to answer to, no one to lean on. Just the way I liked it. I hefted my backpack higher on my shoulders and adjusted my camera strap. The trail was rough, more overgrown than I'd expected, but that was part of the draw. The more remote the location, the better the shot. No tourists ruining the landscape with their neon jackets or loud conversations, just untouched wilderness. But untouched wilderness had its downsides. My camera had been acting up since I'd arrived. I'd missed some great shots because of it. Fog rolling over the peaks, a hawk perched on a branch just feet away. But I told myself I didn't care. This trip wasn't about getting everything right, it was about getting away. I paused to catch my breath and set the camera down on a fallen log. The lens fogged up almost instantly in the damp air, and when I wiped it off with the corner of my jacket, I realized I'd smeared dirt across it. Typical. "Come on," I muttered, digging into my bag for a lens cloth. As I crouched there, rubbing at the stubborn streak of mud, I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping. At first, I thought it was a woodpecker. There were plenty of them around these parts, but it didn't sound right. Too slow, too steady. Tap, pause, tap, pause. I looked up, but the fog was thickening, swallowing the trees just a few yards ahead of me. The tapping stopped. I told myself it was just a branch knocking against a tree in the wind. I wasn't scared of being out here alone. In fact, I preferred it. No one to distract me, no one to get in my head. Still, the silence that followed felt too quiet, like something was waiting. I shoved the lens cloth back into my pack and stood up, forcing myself to move on. I had a campsite to reach before dark, and I wasn't about to get spooked by a weird noise, at least not this early in the trip. The fog never really lifted by the time I reached the clearing where I planned to camp. It was so thick I could barely see 10 feet in any direction. I set up my tent quickly, more out of habit than anything else, though I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me. I wasn't sure why. There was no one around, no animals scurrying through the underbrush, not even a bird call to break the stillness. I figured a good night's sleep would shake off the nerves. I was just tired. The last few months had been brutal. Breaking up with Paul, the constant fights before it, the way he made me feel like I couldn't do anything right. This trip was supposed to be my way of proving him wrong, proving to myself that I didn't need him, that I didn't need anyone. But the anxiety crept up on me anyway, a tight knot in my chest as I lay in my sleeping bag, staring up at the ceiling of my tent. Then there was that tapping again, faint and far off. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter. Just the wind, just the forest. But then it stopped abruptly, like someone had flipped a switch, and I heard something else, something worse, a whisper. It was so faint I could barely make it out, but it was there, threading through the fog outside. It didn't sound like words, not exactly, but it was too rhythmic to be wind, too deliberate. I sat up, listening hard, my heart racing. Nothing. I grabbed my flashlight, clicked it on, and aimed it through the thin walls of the tent. Just mist and shadows. The whispering stopped, but the silence that followed felt alive, thick with something I couldn't name. I switched off the light, telling myself I was just being paranoid, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The next morning, I packed up quickly. I wasn't scared, I told myself, I just wanted to get moving. The fog had lifted slightly, but the forest felt wrong somehow, like it was holding its breath. I didn't like it. I wanted to get to higher ground, get some better shots, and move on. By midday, I'd made it to a rocky ridge that overlooked a valley. It was beautiful, exactly the kind of shot I'd come for. The fog clung to the trees below, creating a sea of white with the mountain peaks poking through like islands. I snapped a few photos, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut. When I reviewed the pictures on my camera, my breath caught in my throat. There were figures in the fog. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, just shadows cast by the trees. But the more I zoomed in, the clearer they became. Tall, thin shapes, barely visible, but definitely there. Human or something like it, standing motionless among the trees, watching me. I whipped my head around, scanning the valley below. There was no one, just mist and trees. But in the photos, the figures were there. I lowered the camera, heart pounding. I hadn't imagined it. I couldn't have. And yet, the air around me felt suddenly cold. Not the kind of cold that comes with a change in the weather. This was different, deeper, like it had seeped into my bones. I should have left right then, packed up, and headed back to the main trail. But I didn't. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was keeping me here, pulling me deeper into the wilderness. That night, I camped by a small stream. I hadn't seen any more figures, but the unease clung to me like a second skin. I felt like I was being watched constantly. Every time I looked over my shoulder, there was nothing there, but the feeling wouldn't go away. I built a fire, more for comfort than warmth, and tried to distract myself by reviewing the day's photos. That's when I noticed something else. The figures in the fog weren't in just one picture. They were in all of them. Some barely visible, others clearer, standing in groups or alone. Always watching, always there. My hands started shaking and I nearly dropped the camera. It was impossible. I'd been out there for hours and I hadn't seen anyone. Not a single hiker, no animals, no birds, but there they were in every shot. Suddenly, the whispering started again. It was louder this time, closer. I stood up, flashlight in hand, scanning the trees. The beam of light cut through the mist, but I couldn't see anything. Still, the whispering grew louder, like it was circling me, coming from all directions at once. You shouldn't be here. That's what it sounded like, a woman's voice, soft but firm, blending with the rustling leaves and flowing water. It wasn't clear, not exactly, but the meaning was clear. I wasn't welcome. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest and back toward the tent. The whispering followed me, growing sharper, angrier. My flashlight flickered and for a brief second I saw her. She stood at the edge of the trees, tall and thin, dressed in old, ragged clothes. Her face was pale, hollow-eyed, and filled with sorrow. She didn't move. She just stood there, watching me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Then, just as quickly as she appeared, she was gone. The flashlight flickered back to life and the whispering stopped. I didn't sleep that night. By the time dawn broke, I knew I had to leave. This wasn't some trick of the mind. No matter how much I tried to rationalize it, there was something in these woods, something angry, and I had trespassed. I packed up my gear in record time and set off toward the trailhead. But the forest seemed different now, like the trees were closing in on me. The path I'd taken to get here was gone, swallowed by the fog. My compass spun wildly, Useless, and the map was no help in the unmarked wilderness. Panic gnawed at my insides as I stumbled through the underbrush, trying to keep my bearings. But the more I walked, the more lost I became. And all the while, I could feel her watching, waiting. The whispering started again as I crossed a small clearing, louder this time, angrier. I dropped my pack, desperate, and spun around. There she was, standing in the mist, her eyes locked on mine. I fell to my knees, breath coming in ragged gasps. "I'm sorry," I whispered, though my voice was barely audible over the growing wind. "I didn't mean to." Her expression softened just slightly, and for the first time, I felt something other than fear. She wasn't just angry, she was in pain. "I'm sorry," I repeated, louder this time. "I shouldn't be here. I didn't know." The wind died down. The whispering faded, and slowly the figure in the mist began to dissolve, melting back into the fog. I sat there for what felt like hours, heart racing, too afraid to move. But she was gone. The air felt lighter, the forest less oppressive. When I finally stood, I saw it. Small, barely visible in the fog, a stone hidden among the trees. A grave. Long forgotten death buried deep in the wilderness. I didn't touch it. I didn't even get close. I just stood there for a moment, paying my respects to the spirit I disturbed. Then, without looking back, I turned and walked away. I made it out of the Smokies that day, but the images, the figures in the fog, the woman's sorrowful eyes followed me. I never published the photos from that trip. Some things I realized weren't meant to be captured. Some things were meant to be left alone. My name is Ronaldo Lopez, and I'm 23 years old. This happened last fall at Spruce Knob, the highest peak in West Virginia. I had just finalized my divorce, packed up my life, and hit the road in an RV that still smelled like the dealership. I told myself this trip was about reconnecting with nature, about finding some clarity, but really I was running from guilt, loneliness, and the wreckage of a life I'd built and then broken. I chose Spruce Knob because it was isolated, and isolation was exactly what I thought I needed. I didn't know the stories. I didn't know about the Devil's Rock. If I had, I'd like to think I would have turned back, but honestly, I don't know if I could have resisted. I arrived in the late afternoon, the sun slipping behind the ridge as I parked my RV at a campsite near the summit. The forest here was dense, the spruce trees standing like sentinels in the fading light. I set up a small fire and sat by it, nursing a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. That's when I met Eli. He was the kind of man who looked like he belonged in the mountains, tall, broad-shouldered, and weathered like an old oak tree. I'd stopped by the trailhead earlier to get a map, and he must have noticed the out-of-state plates on my RV because he wandered over to introduce himself. "You're new around here," he said, his voice gravelly but not unkind. "Just passing through," I replied. We talked for a while, mostly about the trails and the weather. Then, as if it were an afterthought, Eli asked, "You hear about the Devil's Rock yet?" I shook my head, curious despite myself. "It's an old legend," he said, leaning against a tree. "There's a boulder deep in the woods, smooth as glass, they say. Folks claim if you touch it, you can make a wish, but it always comes at a price." I laughed nervously. "And what's the price?" Eli's eyes darkened. "Depends. Sometimes it's your sanity, sometimes it's worse." I tried to brush it off as campfire talk, but his tone stayed with me long after he walked away. The first night was uneventful, but strange things started happening the next day. I set out on one of the trails Eli had recommended, hoping to clear my head and maybe snap a few photos. The forest was quiet, too quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, just the sound of my boots crunching on the dirt. That's when I noticed the trail veering off to the right, unmarked and overgrown. I don't know why, but I felt compelled to follow it. The path twisted through the trees, narrowing until I reached a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a massive boulder, smooth and black, its surface glinting faintly in the dim light. Dead trees surrounded it, their branches bare and skeletal. I didn't stay long. There was something about the place that made my skin crawl. That night, the tapping started. I was lying in bed, half asleep, when I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping against the side of the RV. I froze, my heart pounding. It sounded like someone or something was knocking. But when I finally mustered the courage to look outside, there was nothing there. The next morning, I found small handprints in the dirt outside the RV. They were faint but unmistakable, as if left by a child. I shook it off as my imagination, but later that day, I saw her. She was standing just off the trail, a teenage girl with pale skin and long dark hair. She wore a tattered dress that looked like something out of a history book, and her eyes were wide and pleading. "Are you lost?" I called out. She nodded but didn't speak. I stepped toward her, but before I could get close, she turned and darted into the woods. I chased after her, shouting for her to wait, but she disappeared, leaving no trace but a trail of faint footprints leading toward the clearing. When I returned to the RV, the unease I'd been feeling turned into something darker. I couldn't shake the girl's image from my mind, her hollow eyes and the way she seemed to vanish into thin air. That night, I dreamed about the Devil's Rock. In the dream, the girl was sitting on the boulder, her hands resting on its smooth surface. Her voice was soft but insistent. "It can give you what you want." When I woke, I couldn't get her words out of my head. The next morning, I decided to find the boulder again. I don't know what I was expecting. Answers maybe, or closure. The unmarked trail was easier to find this time, as if it had been waiting for me. The clearing was just as I remembered it, the boulder looming in the center like some ancient monolith. The air was heavy, the kind of heaviness that presses against your chest and makes it hard to breathe. And then she appeared. The girl stood on the far side of the boulder, her expression vacant. She raised a hand, motioning for me to come closer. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. She didn't answer. Instead, she placed her hand on the boulder and whispered, "It can give you what you want." I hesitated, my heart pounding. The memory of my family, the laughter of my kids, the warmth of my ex-wife's smile flooded my mind. I hadn't seen them in months, and the thought of a second chance was intoxicating. Before I could stop myself, I reached out and touched the rock. At first, nothing happened. I felt a faint vibration beneath my fingers, but that was all. Disappointed, I returned to the RV, trying to convince myself it had been a foolish impulse. But that evening, my phone rang. It was my ex-wife. "I've been thinking about us," she said, her voice tentative. "Maybe we should talk." The weight in my chest lifted, replaced by a flicker of hope. I thought the rock had worked, that I'd been given a miracle. But the miracle came with a price. That night, the girl returned. She appeared outside the RV, her face pressed against the window. Her eyes were no longer pleading. They were dark, empty voids that seemed to suck the air from the room. "You made your wish," she whispered. "Now it's time to pay." The lights in the RV flickered and the shadows inside began to twist and rise. I grabbed a flashlight and stumbled outside, shouting into the darkness, "What do you want from me?" Her voice came from everywhere at once. "It's not me. It's the rock." Desperate, I raced back to the clearing. The forest seemed alive, the trees closing in around me as I ran. When I reached the boulder, it seemed larger, its surface pulsing like a living thing. The girl appeared again, her form shifting and flickering like a glitch in a video. "You can't undo it," she said, her voice echoing, "but you can stop it from taking more." I grabbed a hammer from my pack and swung it at the boulder. The impact sent a shockwave through the clearing, and the girl screamed, her voice merging with the sound of the rock cracking. The boulder split down the middle, a deafening roar echoing through the forest. The girl collapsed, her form dissolving into mist as the air grew still. When I woke the next morning, the clearing was empty. The boulder was gone, reduced to a pile of rubble. I returned to the RV and called my ex-wife, apologizing for everything. Whatever chance we had at reconciliation, I knew it had to come from me, not from some cursed rock. As I drove away from Spruce Knob, I caught a glimpse of the girl in my rearview mirror, standing among the trees. She wasn't smiling, but she wasn't angry either. She was just watching. Sometimes the things we want most come at a price too steep to pay, and sometimes we have to let go to move forward. My name is Alistair Scott and I'm 36 years old. This happened in the Dudes Wilderness, West Virginia during what was supposed to be a peaceful week of camping. I had no idea how quickly my retreat into solitude would turn into something out of a nightmare. One, I'm still not entirely sure. I escaped. I've been camping for years. Usually alone. It started as a way to clear my head after I left firefighting, but it quickly became my way of life. Out there, there's no noise nor minders of my failures, no people to disappoint, just my RV and the wild I'd read about dolly sods, online, rugged trails, beautiful, overlooks the kind of place where you could truly feel off the grid. That's exactly what I wanted. I parked my RV near a trailhead that wasn't even marked on the maps. The road had been rough, full of potholes and overgrown branches, but I liked that the harder it was to get there. The fewer people I'd run into the first couple of days were uneventful. I hiked, gathered firewood, and took in the scenery. The wilderness was hauntingly beautiful. Mistrolling through the trees in the mornings, the sunlight casting golden patterns on the forest full. Orbued on the third day, things started to shift. I was out for a hike when I heard it for the first time, a faint, high-pitched whistle at first. It thought it might be a bird, but it wasn't rhythmic, and it didn't seem to come from any particular direction. It would start then stop abruptly, as if someone or something was toying with me. It tried to ignore it, but the sound followed me all the way back to camp that night. As I sat by the fire, I heard it again, a long, mournful whistle that seemed closer this time. It shined my flashlight into the woods, but there was nothing there. The hair so the back of my neck stood stunned. It told myself it was just the wind. The next morning, I decided to venture deeper into the forest. I marked my path, carefully broken, branches, small piles of stones, so I wouldn't get lost. The weather was strange, with the sky shifting between sunny and overcast, but that wasn't unusual in the mountains about an hour. I came across something odd, carvings on a tree. They were fresh, not the kind of marks that years of growth would stretch and fade. There were symbols, circles, arrows, and stick figures with hollow, featureless faces. It touched the bark, half expecting it to feel hot or cold, but it was just wood still. It's intact. Shiver through me. I kept going, but the forest seemed wrong. The trees were denser here, their branches twisting unnaturally. The ground was covered in moss that felt too soft, like stepping on sponge. The whistle came again, faint but persistent, almost sounded like it was calling my name. By the time it turned back, I realized the trail markings I'd made were gone. The broken branches were whole, the piles of stones scattered. It took out my compass, but then needles spun aimlessly. My GPS wouldn't con. Either panic started to creep in. I'd never been lost like this before. It forced myself to stay calm and retrace me steps as best as I could. After what felt like hours, I stumbled into a clearing, and that's when I saw with the hollow tree. It was massive, its bark blackened and split in places, as if it had been struck by lightning. A large opening at its base gaped like a mouth. Around it were more carvings, some etched into the stones that surrounded the tree like sentinels. The air here was different, heavy, charged, as a fast storm was about to break. I heard the whistle again, but the time it was followed by a voice. Alistair, as it was a voice I hadn't the Arden years, but I recognized it instantly. Charlie, my partner from my firefighting days, the man I'd failed to save. No, I whispered, backing away. This wasn't possible. Charlie was dead. Isawim died, but the voice came again, softer this time, tinged with pain. Alistair, why did you leave me? Me head swam. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The whistle grew louder, and the shadows around the tree seemed to deepen, pooling like ink. Something stepped out from the hollow, tall, thin, with impossibly long MB sand. A face that wasn't a face. Its eyes were hollow pits, its mouth an empty void. It didn't move toward me. It didn't need to. Its presence was suffocating. My chest tightened, and it felt like I was drowning. The voice continued, but now it wasn't just Charlie. It was my father, my sister, people I hadn't thought about in years, all of them accusing me, asking why I hadn't done more. The figure raised a hand, and the shadows around its hifted, forming shapes. People, but wrong. Their faces were blank, their bodies twisted. They reached for me, their hollow eyes accusing. Is stumbled back. Ard, my breath coming in. Asp, stay away. Is shouted, though my voice sounded small and weak. The entity didn't stop. It stepped closer, and with each step it projected became sharper, more vivid. The fire that killed Charlie, mother's disappointed face when I quit firefighting. The friends I'd pushed away, it was all too much. I don't know how it made it back to the RV. My legs moved on autopilot, carrying me through the forest as the whistle followed, growing fainter, but never disappearing. When I finally reached the clearing where the RV was parked, I collapsed against the side, gasping for air. I locked the doors and sat in the driver's seat, my hands shaking. It tried to start the engine, but it wouldn't turn over. I checked my watch, but the hands weren't moving. Everything felt wrong, as if time itself had stopped that night. The entity came again. I didn't see it, but I felt its presence, heavy and cold, pressing against the walls of the RV. Shadows moved outside the windows, and the whistle pierced the silence. It tried to block it out, covering my ears, but the voices came anyway, whispering inside my head, you can't run. Alistair. The next day. Found a journal tucked into the book bushes near the RV. It was old, the pages yellowed and brittle, but the writing was clear. It belonged to someone named Daniela Camper, who had been here years ago. His entries started normal enough, descriptions of hikes, wildlife, the beauty of the wilderness, but as it flipped through, the tone changed. He wrote about the whistle, the carvings, the hollow tree. The last entry sent chill down my spine. It wants what you regret most, it feeds on it. If you don't give it what it wants, it will take everything. I knew what I had to do. I didn't have a plan, Stayed spirit idea. I gathered a metal pole somer OP and a fire starter from the RV. The storm clouds were rolling in, and I hoped I could use the lightning to destroy whatever was tied to the tree when I returned to the hollow tree. The entity was waiting for me. Its hollow eyes bore into mine, and the shadows writhed around it like living things. The whistle was deafening now, and the voices screamed in my head. I eyed the metal pole to one of the stones near the tree, angling it toward the sky. My hands shook as I worked, but I couldn't stop the entity. It didn't try to stop me, just stew there watching as if amused by my efforts. When the storm broke, I stood in the clearing holding my breath. Lightning streaked across the sky, and I prayed it would hit the pole. For a moment, nothing happened, and I thought I'd failed. Then the bolt came, it struck the pole, and the energy surged into the ground, splitting the hollow tree with a deafening crack. The entity let out a scream, high-pitched and human, filled with rage and pain. The shadows dissolved and the wind whistle stopped. I stumbled back to the RV, my body trembling, my mind reeling. The storm passed as quickly as it had come in for the first time in days. The forest felt normal, quiet still. The engine started on the first try, and I drove away without looking back. I don't know if I destroyed the Hollow Watcher or if I just escaped its grasp, but I do know one thing: I'll never go back to Dolly Sods, and I'll never camp alone. Again, some places aren't meant to be explored, no matter how beautiful they seem. The forest around me was too quiet. I'd been sitting by the campfire outside my RV, enjoying the silence for hours, but now something felt off, the kind of off you feel in your gut before your brain catches up to what's happening. No wind, no rustling in the leaves, just dead stillness. That was the first thing I noticed when I pulled up to this remote campsite, deep in Mount Hood National Forest. A place like this should have been full of life. Birds, insects, something. But the only sound was the crackle of the fire and the distant hum of the radio I'd brought along. I needed quiet after everything that had happened over the past year. I wasn't looking for distractions, just isolation. After my wife's death, nothing made sense anymore. People kept telling me I needed to move on, but the noise of life, the sympathy, the well-meaning advice, the friends who didn't know what to say, became unbearable. So I packed up and hit the road, hoping the wilderness would give me space to think, or maybe stop thinking altogether. I thought the forest would help. It had, until now. The radio's static broke the silence, a sudden burst of garbled noise that made me jump. I turned my head toward the RV, where the old ham radio sat inside. I hadn't even touched the thing in hours. It was an antique one I'd brought along to mess around with during my downtime, but the signal had been dead all day. No stations, no chatter, nothing, until now. I stood up from the fire, walking over to the RV and ducking inside to check the radio. The static was louder, more insistent, like it was trying to form words but couldn't quite get there. I twisted the dials, searching for a clearer signal, but all I got was more white noise. Then, through the crackling, I heard it, a voice, faint and garbled, speaking numbers. 1, 3, 7, 8, 9. The numbers repeated over and over, mechanical and cold, like a voice from an old number station. It didn't make sense. I was miles from anywhere, and this was supposed to be a dead zone. No signal, no interference. The voice paused for a moment, then the numbers started again. 1, 3, 7. It sent a chill through me, but I told myself it was just some rogue signal bouncing off the atmosphere. Maybe a military transmission. There were logical explanations for this kind of thing, I was sure, but the way the numbers repeated over and over felt wrong, like the message wasn't for just anyone, like it was for me. I shut the radio off, my fingers trembling slightly. I wasn't here for this. I needed quiet, not some weird radio signal rattling around in my head. The next day, I tried to forget about the radio. I spent the morning hiking through the woods, the towering pines looming overhead like silent giants. The air was cool and damp, the sky just a sliver of gray through the dense canopy. But something gnawed at me, a faint buzzing at the back of my mind. No birds, no animals, just silence. When I returned to the campsite, the radio was on again, static blaring from the speakers. I hadn't touched it. I stepped inside the RV, staring at the radio like it might come to life. The static was louder now, more intense. I could feel it in my bones, like the vibration from a low hum in the ground. And beneath the static, the numbers were back. 1, 3, 7, 8. I slammed my hand down on the off switch, killing the sound. My pulse was racing, my mind scrambling for an explanation. It had to be a glitch, something with the wiring, maybe a stray electrical signal. I'd worked with enough technology over the years to know that things sometimes did strange things when you weren't looking. But the numbers, the way they were so clear, so deliberate, made me uneasy. I stepped back outside, trying to push the growing sense of unease away. That's when I noticed the man standing at the edge of my campsite. I hadn't heard him approach. He was just there, tall, scruffy, wearing a weathered jacket and a backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked like a camper, but there was something about the way he stood, stiff and tense, like he was waiting for something to happen. "Hey," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "You lost?" The man looked at me, his face tight with anxiety. I heard it too. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. "Heard what?" "The signal. The numbers," he said, glancing toward the RV. "I've been picking it up on my own radio. It's not normal." My mouth went dry. "You've heard it too?" The man nodded. "I'm Ben," he said, stepping closer. His voice was low. "I was camping a few miles down the road. I've been getting static, voices, weird electrical interference. My GPS stopped working. My cell phone drained to 0 in minutes." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. "What do you think it is?" Ben shook his head, his eyes darting toward the trees. "I don't know, but it's not natural. The way the signal moves, it's like it's getting closer." I didn't know how to respond to that. I was a man of logic, of science. Signals were signals, glitches were glitches. But there was something about the way Ben spoke, the fear in his eyes, that made my skin crawl. That night, the radio came to life again. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on the campfire and the peaceful silence of the woods, but the static was louder than before. The numbers were clearer, more insistent. 1, 3, 7. Ben was sitting across from me, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. His eyes were constantly scanning the dark forest around us. He hadn't relaxed since he showed up, and I couldn't blame him. There was something wrong here, something I couldn't explain. "You think it's some kind of broadcast?" I asked, more to fill the silence than anything. Ben shook his head. "I don't think it's a broadcast at all." "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I think it's a warning, or a signal from something out there." I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. A warning from what? Before I could ask more, the static on the radio cut out for a moment. There was only silence, the kind of silence that presses down on you, that makes your skin prickle with anticipation. Then a sound, a soft, rhythmic clicking, like something metallic tapping against wood. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the trees, but the beam only revealed darkness. The clicking grew louder, echoing through the forest. Then, through the radio, a voice crackled to life. "We see you." My blood ran cold. Ben's eyes widened, his face pale. "What the hell was that?" he whispered. I could barely whisper back, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. "We see you." The voice repeated, distorted and mechanical. "We see you." I stood up, flashlight shaking in my hand. The clicking sound was closer now, moving through the trees. The forest seemed to pulse with energy, the air growing thick and heavy, like the atmosphere itself was alive. "I think we should leave," Ben said, his voice tight with fear. For once, I agreed. The next morning, I found Ben's tent abandoned. His gear was scattered around the clearing, but there was no sign of him, no footprints, no note. Just the cold, empty forest and the low hum of static that had settled into the air like a living thing. I tried to follow his tracks, but they vanished in the thick underbrush. It was like he'd walked into the trees and disappeared. The GPS on my phone was useless, spinning me in circles, the battery draining faster than I'd ever seen. The static in my ears grew louder the further I went, like the signal was inside my head, vibrating through my skull. The numbers were back too, repeating over and over, etched into my mind. 1, 3, 7. By midday, I stumbled across something I hadn't expected, an old, dilapidated radio tower hidden deep in the woods. The metal was rusted, vines crawling up the sides, but it was still faintly humming with power. I climbed the tower, every step echoing in the stillness, my heart hammered in my chest. At the top, I found the source of the signal, a small glowing device, pulsing with an eerie cold light. It didn't belong here. It wasn't part of the original tower. It was something else, something foreign. I reached out and touched it, and the static in my head exploded. The numbers, the clicking, the voices, all crashed into me at once in an unbearable cacophony of sound. I stumbled back, nearly falling off the tower. as the forest seemed to come alive around me. The lights returned, flickering in the trees, cold and mechanical. The clicking grew louder, more frantic, as if something was chasing me. I ran. I don't remember how I made it back to the RV. The lights followed me, the clicking never far behind, but I managed to get inside and slam the door shut. My hands were shaking as I started the engine, the device still clutched in my hand. As I drove away, the static began to fade, but the numbers never left me. They echoed in my mind, a constant whisper. Even as the forest disappeared in the rearview mirror, it didn't stop. It's been days now, and I'm still hearing them. 1, 3, 7. I can't get them out of my head, and I can't shake the feeling that whatever was out there, whatever sent that signal, knows where I am, and it's not done with me yet. My name is Barnaby Shaw, and in 2015, I went camping in the Bitterroot National Forest, Montana. I figured it would be a peaceful getaway after getting out of a messy divorce and the corporate grind back in Salt Lake City. Now, let me be clear. I'm not one of those folks who pack up and run every time life kicks them in the teeth. But after all that drama, I needed a break. I bought a battered old RV, loaded up with canned beans, some cheap whiskey, and the dog-eared copy of Catch-22 my ex left behind. The spot I picked was way off the beaten path, almost a 2-hour drive from any semblance of civilization. The Bitterroots are beautiful in that rugged, untouched way, full of dense trees, streams with water so cold it knocked the wind out of you, and wildlife that wants nothing to do with you. My setup was simple. Park the RV in a clearing by the tree line, fire up a camp stove, and sink into the peace. Around dusk, I noticed a pickup truck far down the old logging road. Didn't think much of it at first. Locals sometimes camped here too, or maybe some other traveler was looking for a secluded spot. But the way that truck was sitting there, headlights off, engine running, had me curious. I strolled over, pretending to stretch my legs while sneaking glances at the truck. A man stepped out, maybe mid-40s, with a lean, wiry frame, like he could break in half, but somehow looked tough enough to wrestle a bear. He was dressed in a stained jacket, ratty jeans, and had a face covered in scars that didn't seem like they were from shaving mishaps. Something about the way he stared, like he was sizing me up, made me uneasy. "Hey, friend," he called out, voice gruff like gravel. "You alone out here?" Not exactly the question you want to hear in the middle of nowhere, but I kept it light, laughing it off, saying, "Yeah, just me and the stars." The guy grunted, nodded, then got back into his truck, never breaking eye contact until he shut the door. He didn't drive off immediately, just sat there idling, watching as I walked back to my RV. He finally pulled away after what felt like an eternity. Once he left, I brushed it off. He was probably just another local, maybe a little off, but harmless, right? I poured myself a drink and huddled by the fire, but even with the whiskey warming me up, I couldn't shake the prickling unease he left behind. The night rolled on with that thick, unnatural silence only deep woods have. I turned in around midnight, locking the RV door, a habit I usually skip out in the boonies. About an hour later, I jolted awake to the sound of something banging on metal. I blinked, still groggy, listening for it again. Then I heard it. A slow, deliberate knock on the RV's side panel. Not random thumps. These knocks had a rhythm, like someone drumming fingers on a table. Figuring it might be some curious animal, I flicked on the flashlight and cracked open the door. The beam cut through the dark, landing on nothing but trees. No signs of life, no animals, no truck. I sighed, chalking it up to a raccoon or something messing around. But before I could close the door, I heard footsteps crunching on the gravel, coming from the other side of the RV. I tensed, holding the flashlight like a club, and edged around the back, ready to scare off whatever was out there. The beam of light caught a figure crouched low near my fire pit, sifting through my stuff with quiet focus. "Hey!" I barked, my voice cracking louder than I wanted. "What are you doing?" The figure didn't budge for a second, then slowly rose to his feet, turning toward me with a grin I couldn't read in the dark. It was the guy from earlier. Same greasy jacket, T-Blade, same twisted grin that stretched his scarred face in ways that seemed unnatural. "You left your stuff out," he said, voice dripping with false friendliness. "Thought I'd keep it safe for you." Didn't need his help, and I told him that flat out, backing up toward the door. There was a coldness in his eyes, Not anger, not the kind of bitterness that comes from life giving you a bad hand. This was something worse, something that didn't belong in those woods or anywhere else. "You know," he said, "I don't get many visitors around here. Folks tend to keep to themselves. But you seemed like the curious kind." My throat tightened. I kept backing up, watching his hands in case he tried something, though I wasn't sure what I'd do if he did. My flashlight wasn't exactly intimidating, and my only other weapon was a pocket knife buried somewhere in my bag inside. "Just passing through," I replied, keeping it casual, light. "No harm done, right?" He smiled, but it was all teeth, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. I almost expected him to lunge at me, but he didn't. Instead, he just stood there, that eerie grin plastered on his face as if he was waiting for something. I took another step back, then turned, heading for the RV door. But I barely got halfway when he called out, "You might want to leave now. Things get interesting around here after dark." He didn't say it with a hint of humor, didn't even try to make it sound friendly. It was a threat, plain and simple, the kind you don't misinterpret. I climbed into the RV, locked the door, and waited, watching through the small, fogged-up window as he vanished into the trees, his shadow melting away into the forest. Trying to sleep after that was a lost cause. I sat up, listening for any sounds that weren't the usual creaks and snaps of a forest night. Around 3 a.m, just as my nerves were starting to calm down, I heard a soft scraping against the side of the RV. The sound made my skin crawl. It was a slow, methodical scratching, like nails dragging down the metal frame. I swallowed hard, forcing myself not to panic. But when the scratching moved to the window above my bed, something snapped in me. I grabbed the flashlight and swung it toward the sound, heart hammering in my chest. But when I flicked it on, the beam caught nothing, just my own tired, rattled face staring back at me in the reflection. I stayed up all night, waiting for the first hint of daylight. I don't know how I did it, but as soon as that sun broke the horizon, I was packed up and ready to hit the road. I fired up the RV, got the hell out of there without looking back. Figured I was in the clear. Maybe a little shaken, but no worse for wear. Just as I hit the main road out of the forest, I spotted the same pickup truck parked on the shoulder, waiting. I glanced over, and sure enough, he was sitting in the driver's seat, staring at me with that same twisted grin. It wasn't until I sped past, seeing him watch me in the rearview mirror, that I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Sticking out of the back of his truck were several large black trash bags, stuffed full and tied tight, with smears of something dark streaking down the sides. Sticking out from one of the bags, plain as day, was a human hand. I stared at that hand in the rearview mirror, my brain doing somersaults trying to process what I was seeing. It wasn't possible, was it? I must have been exhausted, sleep-deprived, and shaken up by the night's events. My mind had to be playing tricks on me. But I knew what I saw, and it was real. Fingers pale, curled, sticking out of a trash bag like it was garbage. I punched the gas, speeding down that winding forest road, the RV groaning as it struggled to keep up with my panic. Heart racing, I looked for cell service, any signal to call for help, but of course, out here in the Bitterroots, there was nothing. Just me, the road, and that guy in his beat-up truck somewhere behind me. The dirt road twisted and turned, my RV rattling as I took each bend too fast, trying to put as much distance as possible between myself and whatever nightmare I'd just glimpsed. I chanced to look in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the pickup tearing down the road after me, but he was gone, nowhere in sight. I didn't stop driving until I hit a small town about an hour south, a place called Darby. I pulled into the first gas station I saw and stumbled out of the RV, my legs barely able to hold me up. The attendant, a young guy with a bored look, stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. "Phone," I said, pointing to the counter, barely able to get the word out. "I need to use the phone urgently." He nodded, probably thinking I was some crazed wilderness nut, but he handed me the phone anyway. I dialed 911, my fingers shaking so badly I could hardly punch in the numbers. The dispatcher's voice crackled on the other end, calm and collected. I told him everything. The man, the truck, the trash bags, the hand. The dispatcher took my statement with the practiced calm of someone who'd heard it all before, but I could tell she knew this was something serious. She promised to send someone out to the area and asked me to stay put in case they had further questions. I sat on the curb outside the gas station, the morning sun creeping over the mountains, turning everything a gentle shade of orange. It felt surreal, like the events of the night hadn't actually happened, like maybe I dreamed it all, but the sweat on my skin and the thundering of my heartbeat said otherwise. About an hour later, a sheriff's deputy arrived, a stocky guy named Officer Redford who looked about as rugged as the mountains themselves. He took my statement, asking me to repeat every detail. I told him about the man's scars, his truck, the bags, the hand. Officer Redford's face hardened with each word, a shadow crossing his eyes. "You're not the first one to report something strange up there," he said, glancing back at his squad car. "We've had some missing persons cases recently, hikers mostly, and campers gone without a trace. Could be we finally got a lead." He asked me to wait in town, just in case. They were sending a search team up the road I'd come from, but I knew there was no way I was sticking around. The deputy didn't push, just handed me his card and told me to call if I remembered anything else. As I drove out of Derby, I couldn't shake the image of that man's grin. The way he'd stared at me like he knew something I didn't, like he'd planned all along to leave me rattled, afraid, running. I felt a chill, but not the kind you feel from fear. It was the cold grip of certainty, the kind that sinks in when you know you've just come face to face with something truly wrong. A week later, I got a call from Officer Redford. They'd found the truck abandoned up in the Bitterroot, doors open, trash bags scattered nearby. And in one of those bags, along with the remains of 3 missing hikers, they found a journal, scraps mostly, with ramblings about cleansing the forest and keeping it pure. Some manifesto scribbled by a man who saw himself as a twisted guardian of the wilderness. They never found him. My name is Benedict Lopez, and back in 2017, I took my RV out to the Great Smoky Mountains in Tennessee. I figured some fresh mountain air would do me good, and maybe I'd finally finish that novel I've been pretending to write for the past 5 years. You know, the one that's supposed to be the next big thing, but currently exists as a grand total of 2 paragraphs. I parked my RV at a secluded spot near a quiet stream, surrounded by towering trees that seemed to touch the sky. Setting up camp was straightforward enough. Unfold the chair, light the grill, and try not to burn dinner like I usually do. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I settled in with a lukewarm beer and my notebook, hoping inspiration might strike. Spoiler alert, it didn't. The first night was uneventful, aside from a raccoon that managed to outsmart me and steal half a loaf of bread. Clever little thief. I woke up the next morning to the sound of birds chirping and leaves rustling, a welcome change from the city noise I'm accustomed to. Deciding to explore, I grabbed my backpack stuffed with snacks, a map, and a canteen, and headed out. After a couple of hours hiking, I stumbled upon an old wooden sign that read, "Trail closed." The path looked fine to me, and my curiosity got the better of my common sense. "Rules are more like guidelines anyway," I muttered, and stepping over the broken chain blocking the trail. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? I'd get lost and have to eat my terrible cooking for survival? The trail led me deeper into the woods, and the sounds of wildlife grew quieter. The air felt heavier, and the trees seemed denser, their branches knitting together to block out the sun. I checked my watch. It was only noon, but it felt like dusk. Just as I considered turning back, I heard voices up ahead. Relief washed over me. At least I wasn't the only idiot ignoring warning signs. I followed the muffled sounds until I reached a clearing. What I saw made me freeze. A group of men stood around a makeshift table covered with packages and firearms. They were engrossed in a heated discussion, their faces obscured by baseball caps and sunglasses. Drug dealers, I realized with a jolt. This was definitely not the book club meeting I was hoping for. My mind raced. Retreating quietly seemed like the best option, but of course, fate had other plans. A twig snapped under my foot, sounding louder than a gunshot in the eerie silence. "Who's there?" one of them shouted, his hand moving to the pistol at his waist. Panicking, I did the only logical thing. I ran. Branches whipped against my face as I tore through the forest, the angry shouts of the men echoing behind me. "Stop! We just want to talk," they yelled, which was about as comforting as a tax audit. I zigzagged through the trees, hoping to lose them, but these guys knew the terrain better than I did. My lungs burned and my legs felt like jelly, but adrenaline kept me moving. I burst into another clearing and skidded to a halt. In front of me was a steep drop into a rocky ravine. "Well, isn't this just grand?" I muttered. Footsteps crashed through the underbrush behind me. With no time to think, I scrambled along the edge, searching for a way down that wouldn't result in a broken leg or worse. A gunshot rang out, the bullet hitting a tree trunk inches from my head. "This isn't exactly the kind of camping excitement I signed up for," I yelled, more to myself than anyone else. Spotting a narrow path leading downward, I took it, nearly slipping several times on the loose rocks. The shouts grew fainter, and I allowed myself a moment to catch my breath at the bottom. My reprieve was short-lived. Ahead of me lay a maze of abandoned mining tunnels. Given my stellar luck so far, I figured, why not delve into a dark, creepy tunnel? After all, I hadn't had my daily dose of poor decisions. Entering the mine, I was enveloped in darkness, so complete it felt tangible. I fumbled for my phone to use its flashlight, silently cursing myself for not bringing a real one. The weak beam illuminated just enough to keep me from tripping. The air was stale, carrying the scent of damp earth and rusted metal. As I moved deeper, I heard the faint echo of footsteps behind me. "You've got to be kidding me," I whispered. These guys were relentless. I picked up the pace, the tunnel branching off in multiple directions, left, right, then left again. I had no idea where I was going. My navigational skills were about as good as my cooking. Suddenly, the ground gave way beneath me, and I tumbled down a shaft, landing hard on a pile of debris. Pain shot through my ankle. "Fantastic. Sprained ankle in a horror movie scenario," I groaned. Above me, shadows moved. The men peered down, their faces still hidden, but their intentions clear. "You've seen too much," one of them said coldly. "Can't let you leave." "Look, I promise I didn't see anything. I'm as blind as a bat without echolocation skills," I shouted back, attempting humor that fell flat. They began climbing down, and I knew I had to move. Ignoring the throbbing pain, I limped through a narrow passageway. The tunnel opened up into a cavern where old mining equipment lay abandoned. An idea sparked. Grabbing a rusted pickaxe, I positioned myself behind a support beam. As the first man entered, I swung with all my might. The pickaxe connected with a sickening thud, and he collapsed. I didn't have time to process the grim reality. I had to defend myself. The second man lunged at me, tackling me to the ground. We grappled, his hands squeezing around my throat. Spots danced in my vision. Desperate, I reached out and grabbed a loose rock, smashing it against his head. He slumped over, unconscious or worse. I didn't check. Staggering to my feet, I searched for an exit. A glimmer of light caught my eye. A small opening above, possibly leading outside. Climbing a rickety ladder, I emerged back into the forest. The fresh air was a stark contrast to the suffocating mine, but I wasn't safe yet. I could hear more voices in the distance. Apparently, these guys had a bigger operation than I thought. I hobbled through the woods, each step agony. Breaking through the tree line, I spotted a ranger station. Relief flooded me. Using the last of my strength, I made my way there, bursting inside. I startled a lone park ranger sipping coffee. "Help, they're after me," I gasped. He sprang into action, grabbing his radio and calling for backup. "Calm down, son. Who's after you?" "Armed men in the woods. Drug dealers, I think. I might have injured 2 of them." Within minutes, the place was swarming with law enforcement. They organized a search team and headed into the forest. I was taken to a nearby hospital to treat my injuries. Later, I learned that the authorities found evidence of a large drug operation hidden in the old mine tunnels. Several suspects were arrested, but the leader, a man named Marcus Snake Reynolds, managed to escape. He was notorious for his brutality and had been on the run for years. As for me, I decided that maybe the great outdoors weren't so great after all. My RV became a permanent fixture in my driveway, and I took up writing at home, where the only danger was running out of coffee. We thought we knew the Ozarks. Matt swore up and down that Mark Twain National Forest was a hidden gem. Untouched trails, beautiful vistas, perfect for a 3-day backpacking trip. He was always good at selling these kinds of trips, making it seem like a dream adventure. I believed him mostly because I loved him, but Even then, as we parked the car at the trailhead and unloaded our gear, I couldn't shake the feeling that this trip was going to be different. Looks like we're in for some real wilderness this time, Kyle said, flashing a grin. He was already making jokes about getting lost and being eaten by cryptids. Classic Kyle, always trying to lighten the mood. I laughed it off, but something about the dense trees and the isolation made the joke sit heavy in my chest. The forest felt too quiet, too vast. Matt, as usual, was all business. He was adjusting his pack, double-checking the map on his phone. "We'll follow the GPS for most of the way," he said, his voice filled with confidence. "Should be easy. Just a couple of tough climbs, but nothing we can't handle." I glanced at Sarah, who was tightening the straps on her hiking boots. She was always the tough one, competitive, never backing down from a challenge. I liked that about her, but sometimes it felt like she had something to prove, especially when Matt was around. I couldn't tell if it was admiration or rivalry. "Let's get moving," Matt called, waving us on. "We've got a lot of ground to cover." The first day went as expected. We hiked deeper into the forest, leaving behind the marked trails and venturing into the heart of the wilderness. The trees were taller here, their branches heavy with green, creating a canopy that let in only slivers of sunlight. It felt like the forest was swallowing us whole, but Matt pressed on, oblivious to the creeping unease that gnawed at me. That night, we set up camp by a small stream. The air was cooler than I expected, a bite of cold that sank into my bones as the sun set. Kyle's tent had a broken pole, something he hadn't noticed until we tried setting it up. He laughed it off, saying he'd just sleep in Sarah's tent, but Matt's frustration was clear. "Next time, check your gear before we leave," Matt snapped, his voice tight. "Relax, man, it's just a tent pole," Kyle said, but the tension between them simmered. I was too tired to deal with their bickering, so I busied myself with starting the fire. Dana, my girlfriend, snapped photos as always, capturing the last glimmers of daylight filtered through the trees. She looked peaceful behind the camera. But I could tell she felt it too, that sense that something was off. That night, we heard the first howl. It was distant at first, almost like the wind moving through the trees, but then it came again. Low and deep, rising into a chilling wail that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "What the hell was that?" Sarah muttered, her hand instinctively moving toward the hatchet strapped to her pack. Matt shrugged, trying to play it off. "Probably just a coyote or something. These woods are full of wildlife." But it didn't sound like any coyote I'd ever heard. I exchanged a glance with Dana, and she raised her eyebrows in that way she did when she didn't believe something. Kyle, of course, I took the opportunity to joke. "Sounds like Bigfoot's out there, or maybe the Ozark Howler," he said, his voice teasing. "You guys know that one, right? Big hairy creature, glowing red eyes, hunts hikers for fun." "Knock it off," Matt said sharply. "It's just an animal. Get some sleep. We've got a long hike tomorrow." I tried to brush it off too, but lying in our tent that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. Every rustle of the leaves, every snap of a twig outside made my heart race. I must have drifted off at some point, but it was restless sleep. The next morning, Dana told me she'd seen something outside the tent, just for a second, but she was sure of it. Red eyes. "I saw red eyes, Matt," she said softly. I laughed nervously, thinking she must have been half asleep. "Maybe it was just a trick of the light," I said, though even I didn't believe it. I hadn't told anyone about the dreams I'd had, the sensation of being watched, hunted, like we were intruding on something that didn't want us there. Day 2 was worse. The forest grew denser, the path less defined, and the GPS signal flickered in and out. At one point, we lost it completely. Matt insisted he could still navigate using the map, but the landscape wasn't matching up with anything. The trees felt wrong, closer somehow, like they were moving in on us. The air grew colder, and the silence pressed down like a weight. "We're lost," Sarah said flatly, glaring at Matt. "We're not lost," he snapped back. "I know where we are." But he didn't. None of us did. That night, we found claw marks on the trees, deep gouges like something had raked through the bark with claws far larger than any animal should have. Dana's hands trembled as she took pictures, but Matt dismissed it. "Could be a bear," he said, though the unease in his voice was obvious. "That's not a bear," Kyle muttered, his earlier joking tone gone. He stared at the claw marks, his face pale. This is messed up, man. Maybe we should turn back. We're not turning back, Matt said, his voice rising. We've come this far. We stick to the plan. The argument that followed was inevitable. Sarah sided with Kyle, saying we were unprepared and it wasn't worth the risk. Dana stayed quiet, but I could see the fear in her eyes. Matt, stubborn as ever, refused to admit we were in over our heads. We set up camp again that night and the howling returned. This time it was closer, louder, the sound reverberating through the trees like something was circling us. I barely slept, and when I did, I dreamt of those red eyes watching us from the darkness. In the morning, we found more signs. Animal carcasses torn apart, strewn across the ground, deer mostly, their bodies mangled in ways that didn't make sense. No predator would kill like that, not for food. It was like something had ripped them apart for fun. Kyle was the first to voice what we were all thinking. It's the howler, man. I'm telling you, this place is messed up. Matt, as always, refused to believe it. It's just a predator. Wolves, maybe. There are no wolves in the Ozarks, Sarah said, her voice shaking. Not anymore. We kept moving, but the howls followed us, louder, closer. By late afternoon, we knew we weren't alone. We were being hunted. It was just before dusk when we saw it. We stopped to rest, setting our packs down near a small clearing. That's when Dana froze, her camera slipping from her hands. Matt, she whispered. Behind you. I turned just in time to see it step out of the trees, hulking, shadowy, with glowing red eyes that burned through the dim light. Its body was massive, covered in thick, dark fur, but its shape was wrong, twisted, like something caught between animal and something more. The howl that followed was like nothing I'd ever heard, a deep, guttural sound that shook me to my core. It didn't charge. It didn't attack. It just stood there, watching, as if daring us to move. We didn't. What the hell is that? Kyle's voice was barely a whisper, his face drained of color. It's not real, Matt muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Dana grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my skin. We have to go, she said, her voice trembling now. The creature tilted its head, almost curious, its red eyes glowing brighter. Then, with one last bone-chilling howl, it slipped back into the trees. We didn't wait to see if it would return. We packed up in record time and started moving fast, too fast. The light was fading and we were stumbling over roots and rocks, our breath coming in short, panicked gasps. That night, we didn't set up camp. We just kept walking, desperate to put distance between us and whatever that thing was. The howls continued, closer, always closer. When dawn finally broke, we stumbled upon an old ranger's cabin. Its roof caved in, the windows shattered. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. We collapsed inside, too exhausted to keep going. For the first time in hours, the howling stopped. Matt stared at the floor, his face pale, his hands shaking. It's not real, he whispered over and over again like a broken record. But we knew better. We had heard it, seen it. The Ozark howler was real, and it had let us live for now. As we sat in that ruined cabin, the forest watching, waiting, I realized we hadn't escaped. Not really. The howler was still out there, somewhere in the shadows, and it was only a matter of time before it came back. My name is Clarence Lopez, and back in 2019, I took my RV up to the rugged coastlines of Glacier National Park in Maine. I figured it was time to trade my computer screen for some green trees. After all, my doctor said that touching grass wasn't just a meme, but actual medical advice. You see, I've been a software engineer for the past 12 years, and my idea of a wild time is merging code without any conflicts. So when my buddy Jeff bet me that I couldn't survive a week without Wi-Fi, I took it as a personal challenge. Plus, I thought it would make for a great story to tell at parties, assuming I ever started going to those. The drive to Acadia was surprisingly smooth, aside from my RV's GPS trying to reroute me into the Atlantic Ocean. Recalculating? More like miscalculating, I muttered. By the time I reached the park, the sun was casting golden hues over the granite cliffs, and I felt a strange mix of excitement and sheer terror. Nature and I aren't exactly on speaking terms, but hey, even introverts need some vitamin D. I found a secluded spot near a cluster of pine trees overlooking the ocean. It was breathtaking. I set up camp, lit a fire after watching a quick tutorial I had downloaded beforehand, Old Habits Die Hard, and settled into a folding chair with a paperback novel. Look at me living like a 19th century poet, I chuckled. As night fell, the stars emerged in a dazzling display I hadn't seen since I was a kid. Away from the city lights, the Milky Way stretched across the sky like a spilled carton of glitter. I was so absorbed that I almost didn't notice the faint sound of footsteps behind me. Expecting company? I joked to myself, turning around. Nothing but trees and shadows. Must have been a critter, or so I hoped. I decided it was a good time to retreat into the safety of my RV, the one with locks. The next morning, I decided to go for a hike along one of the less traveled trails. Armed with a map, a compass I barely knew how to use, and enough trail mix to feed a small village, I set off. The forest was serene, filled with the chirping of birds and the rustling of leaves. I even started whistling a tune, feeling oddly at peace. About 2 miles in, I came across an old man sitting on a fallen log, whittling a piece of wood. He looked up as I approached. "Morning," I said. He gave a curt nod. "Not many folks come down this path," he remarked. "Well, I'm not like most folks," I replied with a grin. "Thought I'd try the road less traveled." He looked me up and down. "Be careful out there. Strange things happen in these woods." "Strange like what? Bears scheduling picnics?" I chuckled. He didn't laugh. "Just watch yourself," he said, returning to his whittling. "Will do," I replied, moving along. "Thanks for the ominous warning." As I continued, the trees seemed to close in, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out much of the sunlight. The trail became less defined, but I was sure I could find my way back. After all, I had a compass, though I was starting to suspect it was just a fancy paperweight. An hour later, I realized I was hopelessly lost. "Great job, Thaddeus. You had one job. Don't get lost in the woods," I muttered. I pulled out my map, but it might as well have been written in hieroglyphics. The forest was eerily quiet now, the kind of silence that amplifies every snap of a twig. Then, in the distance, I heard voices, 2 people arguing. Relieved at the prospect of finding someone who could point me in the right direction, I headed toward the sound. As I got closer, the voices became clearer. "I'm telling you, we need to move them tonight," a gruff voice said. "And I'm telling you it's too risky with that camper around," another voice hissed. I froze. Camper? Were they talking about me? Carefully, I crept forward and peered through the bushes into a small clearing. What I saw made my stomach drop. 2 men stood next to what looked like large tarp-covered mounds. One of them pulled back the tarp, revealing stacks of wooden crates. Curiosity got the better of me, and I squinted to read the markings on the boxes. "Military grade?" I whispered. This was way above my pay grade. Suddenly, a hand clamped down on my shoulder. "Lost, friend?" A deep voice rumbled behind me. I spun around to face a towering man with a cold stare. "Oh, hey there. Just trying to find my way back to the trail," I stammered. He looked me up and down, his gaze settling on the compass dangling uselessly from my neck. "Doesn't seem like you're from around here?" "Just visiting," I said, forcing a smile. "Thought I'd enjoy some nature. Maybe wrestle a bear for a selfie." He didn't laugh. "Why don't you come with me? We can help you get situated." "That's really not necessary," I replied, backing away. "I'm sure I can find my way back." He reached for something behind his back, and instinct kicked in. Without thinking, I bolted in the opposite direction. Adrenaline surged as I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping against my face. Behind me, I heard shouts and the pounding of heavy footsteps. "Stop!" one of them yelled. "You can't run forever." "Watch me," I shouted back, immediately regretting giving away my position. I stumbled upon a narrow stream and decided to follow it, hoping it would lead me back to civilization, or at least put some distance between me and my new friends. My lungs burned and my legs felt like jelly, but I couldn't stop. Just when I thought I might have lost them, a shot rang out, splintering a tree trunk inches from my head. "They're shooting at me. Over what? Trespassing?" I gasped, ducking behind a boulder. I tried to catch my breath. "Think, Thaddeus, think. What would Bear Grylls do?" Probably something involving drinking his own urine. Not helpful. I remembered the emergency whistle attached to my backpack. Grabbing it, I blew as hard as I could, the shrill sound piercing the forest silence. "Help!" I yelled between whistles. "Anyone? Keep making noise, and you'll wish we only shot at you," a voice threatened from somewhere behind me. Spotting a fallen tree stretching across the stream, I scrambled over it, nearly slipping on the moss-covered surface. On the other side, the terrain sloped upward. Maybe if I could get to higher ground, I'd get a cell signal. Breaking through the tree line, I emerged onto a dirt road. And there, like a mirage, was a park ranger's truck. Waving my arms frantically, I sprinted toward it. "Hey, stop!" The ranger stepped out, surprised. "What's going on?" "Two men, they're after me. They're armed." His eyes widened. "Get in." We jumped into the truck and he radioed for backup as we sped away. "You're lucky you found me," he said. "This area isn't usually patrolled." Story of my life, I sighed. Right place, right time for once. Back at the ranger station, I recounted everything. As I described the men in the crates, the rangers exchanged glances. "Did I stumble into something I shouldn't have?" I asked. "Those men have been under investigation," one ranger explained. "Illegal arms dealers using the park as a transit point." Great. And here I was thinking the biggest danger I'd face was undercooked s'mores. They assured me they'd handle it and advised me to stay within populated areas for the remainder of my trip. Not needing more encouragement, I decided to cut my adventure short. As I packed up my RV, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. But a thorough scan of the area showed nothing unusual. Maybe I was just jumpy, or maybe I needed to invest in some less adventurous hobbies like knitting. Before leaving town, I stopped by a local diner for one last decent meal. The waitress, a cheerful woman named Mabel, poured me a coffee. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said. "Not a ghost, just the darker side of human nature," I replied. She raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like there's a story there." Let's just say I won't be winning any hide-and-seek championships. As I was about to pay, I noticed a newspaper on the counter with a headline that caught my eye. "Rangers bust arms trafficking ring in Adia." "Well, I'll be," I murmured. "Crazy world we live in," Mabel commented. "You never know what's happening right under your nose." "Tell me about it," I said, leaving a generous tip. Back on the road, I reflected on my not-so-relaxing getaway. Maybe nature and I weren't meant to be after all. Or maybe I just needed to pick safer parks, ones not hosting clandestine criminal activities. As I crossed state lines, my phone buzzed with a message from Jeff. "Survive without Wi-Fi yet?" I smirked and typed back. "You have no idea." Later that evening, parked at a well-lit campground with plenty of families around, I decided to do a bit of digging. Curiosity killed the cat, they say, but satisfaction brought it back. Using the diner's Wi-Fi, old habits, I researched recent arrests in the area. One name stood out, Victor Lang, a former military officer turned arms dealer known for his ruthless tactics and extensive network. His mugshot sent a chill down my spine. It was the man who had grabbed my shoulder in the woods. "Well, Victor, looks like your camping days are over," I muttered. I learned that the Rangers' intervention had been timely. They'd seized a significant cache of weapons destined for illegal sale. Several associates were still at large, but the operation had been crippled. Feeling a mix of relief and residual adrenaline, I shut my laptop. Maybe I hadn't been a hero, but at least I'd inadvertently helped stop a criminal. Not bad for a guy whose biggest daily challenge was deciding between tabs or spaces in code. Settling into bed, I thought about the irony of escaping to nature to find peace and stumbling into a crime ring instead. Next time, I'm booking a beach resort, I chuckled to myself as I drifted off. The sounds of the campground, kids laughing, firewood crackling were a comforting lullaby. For once, I felt connected to the world around me, even if it hadn't gone as planned. The next morning, I started the long drive home, leaving the wild adventures behind me. Little did I know that this story would become a favorite among my friends. Not that they believed half of it. But that's the thing about truth. It's often stranger than fiction. It was still dark when I arrived at Devil's Tower. The silhouette of the monolith rose above the horizon like a jagged alien structure. The first light of dawn barely touched the sky, but the outline was unmistakable. This place had always felt otherworldly, as if it didn't belong to the same earth the rest of us walked on. I parked the RV in the farthest corner of the campground, away from the few other visitors scattered throughout the park. I wanted isolation, needed it. Actually, after months of losing myself in work and failing to fix my crumbling marriage. I thought this trip might offer me some clarity. If nothing else, I had my research to keep me focused. Legends of Devil's Tower had fascinated me for years, but one in particular always stuck out, the legend of the Watcher. Native tribes in the region spoke of a spirit that guarded the tower, a being that offered ancient knowledge to those who sought it, but demanded a steep price in return. As a history professor obsessed with ancient folklore, I couldn't resist the lure of that story. I had come to Wyoming to dig deeper into those legends, hoping to uncover something, anything that might be hiding in the shadows of the tower. I stepped out of the RV, the crisp morning air biting at my skin. The towering spires of pine trees loomed around me, creating an unsettling sense of isolation. I unpacked my gear, set up camp, and grabbed my notebook. The plan was simple: hike around the base of the tower, take some notes, and maybe, just maybe, find something that would finally make all the pieces click. As I set out toward the trail that led to the tower, I passed an older man in a park ranger uniform, grizzled with deep lines etched into his face. His eyes were sharp, though, alert in a way that made me feel like he saw more than the average person. "Morning," he said, tipping his hat. "Morning," I replied, glancing briefly at his name tag. "Tom, you here for the sights or something else?" His tone was casual, but there was an edge to it. I hesitated. "Research, mostly. I'm looking into some of the old Native American stories about the tower." He nodded slowly, his gaze flicking toward Devil's Tower. "The Watcher, huh?" I stopped. I hadn't mentioned that specific legend. He chuckled softly. "Everyone comes looking for something, but you do well to leave the Watcher alone, son. Some things don't like being disturbed." I tried to brush off his warning with a nervous laugh. "You don't really believe that, do you, Tom?" He didn't smile. "Doesn't matter what I believe. Just be careful. People who go digging too deep around here sometimes find more than they bargain for." With that, he turned and walked back toward the ranger station, leaving me standing there with a pit forming in my stomach. I told myself it was just local superstition, the kind of thing park rangers said to spook tourists. But as I turned my eyes back to the tower, the weight of his words lingered. By midday, I was deep into my hike, circling the base of the tower, taking notes on the surrounding landscape. The towering rock formation loomed overhead, casting long shadows over the forest below. I felt dwarfed by it, like a child standing at the feet of a giant. That's when I noticed the eyes. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a glimmer of sunlight catching on something in the trees. But then I saw them again. Faint, glowing orbs between the branches. They were high up, too high to be an animal, and they followed my every movement. I stopped walking, my heart pounding. The eyes didn't blink, didn't move, just hovered there, watching. I wanted to dismiss them as some kind of wildlife, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more behind them, something intelligent. Forcing myself to continue, I kept walking, occasionally glancing over my shoulder to see if the eyes were still there. They were always just far enough away to keep me wondering, but close enough that I could feel their presence. When I finally made it back to camp, the unease hadn't left me. I sat by the RV trying to write in my notebook, but my mind kept drifting back to the eyes and the trees, the way they'd followed me, never straying too far but never coming closer either. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the campground in shadow. The tower loomed in the distance, a dark silhouette against the purple sky. The fire I'd started crackled weakly, the flames flickering as if they too were uncertain about staying here. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. I was a rational man after all, a professor, a skeptic. But as the night wore on, that skepticism started to feel more like denial. The wind rustled through the trees and the fire guttered low. Then, just as the last light of the day faded, I heard it. A whistle. It started softly, almost like the wind, but it was too distinct, too deliberate, a single drawn-out note that drifted through the trees, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I stood, scanning the darkness. The fire cast faint light around the camp. "Hello?" I called, though I wasn't sure what I expected to hear in return. The whistle came again, sharper this time, closer. I grabbed my flashlight and swung the beam into the trees, but there was nothing. No movement, just the oppressive stillness of the forest. The whistling stopped, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than before. I sat back down, but sleep didn't come easily that night. Every creak of the RV, every rustle of the trees made me bolt upright, expecting to see those glowing eyes or hear that eerie whistle again. I told myself it was just my imagination, just nerves from being out here alone. but the uneasy feeling stuck with me, settling deep in my bones. The next day, I set out again, hoping to shake the paranoia that had settled over me. I hadn't gone far when I ran into Julie, a solo traveler I'd briefly noticed the day before. She was standing at the edge of the trail, staring up at Devil's Tower, a strange look on her face. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said as I approached, though her tone didn't match her words. There was something off about the way she spoke, like her mind was somewhere else entirely. "Yeah," I replied. "I've been hiking around, looking into the old legends. You know about the Watcher?" She turned to me, a slow smile spreading across her face. "The Watcher? You're looking for it?" I nodded, uneasy. "It's just research." Julie's smile widened, but it didn't reach her eyes. "The Watcher doesn't like to be found. You know, it watches, but it doesn't want to be seen." I opened my mouth to respond, but the words stuck in my throat. Something about her was wrong. She seemed too calm, too knowing. The way she stared at me made my skin crawl. Before I could say anything else, she turned and walked back toward her campsite, leaving me standing there, heart pounding for reasons I couldn't explain. That night, the whistling returned. Louder this time, persistent. I sat by the fire, gripping my flashlight, eyes darting between the trees. The whistle circled the campsite, moving closer then further away, like it was testing me, toying with me. Then, just beyond the flickering light of the fire, I saw him. A figure, tall and gaunt, light, standing at the edge of the woods. His face was pale, hollow-eyed, and his mouth was pursed as the tuneless whistle drifted from his lips. My throat tightened. "Who are you?" I asked. The figure didn't answer. He just stood there, whistling that same eerie note. My chest tightened with a sudden surge of panic. I stumbled back toward the RV, tripping over a rock and falling to the ground. When I looked up, he was gone. I scrambled inside, locking the door behind me. The sound of my breath was too loud in the confined space. The next morning, I found footprints around the campsite, small indentations in the dirt leading in circles around the fire. They hadn't been there before. On the final night, I couldn't take it anymore. The dreams of Devil's Tower had become unbearable, nightmares of the stone pulsing, breathing like a living thing. I dreamt of eyes, hundreds of them, watching me from the shadows, always watching. I had to go to the tower. I had to see it up close. I grabbed my gear and set out under the cover of darkness, the whistle guiding me, pulling me toward the monolith. The trees seemed to close in around me as I walked, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The stars above twisted and shifted, unfamiliar constellations blinking in and out of existence. As I neared the base of the tower, I saw her again. Julie, standing at the foot of the rock, her face pale and her smile too wide. "The Watcher is waiting," she whispered. "It's always been waiting." The whistle grew louder, piercing through my thoughts, driving me forward. I reached the tower, my hands trembling as I touched the cold stone. And then, out of the shadows, the Watcher appeared. It was a massive, shadowy figure, its body indistinguishable from the darkness, but its eyes glowing, burning orbs that stared into me, through me. It didn't speak with words, but its presence filled my mind, offering me ancient knowledge, secrets of the tower, of the universe, of myself. But the price, I could feel it gnawing at the edges of my sanity. The more I listened, the more I realized that accepting its offer would mean losing everything. My mind, my soul, everything that made me, me. I stumbled back, tearing myself away from the Watcher's gaze. The whistle reached a fever pitch, and I ran. The ground beneath me shifted and warped as the world collapsed around me. I barely made it back to the RV. When I crossed the threshold, the whistling stopped. The forest fell silent. I drove away as the first light of dawn touched the sky. The image of the Watcher's eyes burned into my mind. I knew I would never be the same. My name is Adam Smith, and back in 2022, I took my RV to the dense forests of Olympic National Park in Washington State. After 19 years of juggling numbers as an accountant, I figured it was time to exchange spreadsheets for pine trees. Maybe I'd find out if bears really do prefer picnic baskets. The open road was a welcome change from the monotony of office life, and as I drove, the skyscrapers faded into towering evergreens and the air grew crisp and fresh. I wondered if this was what air was supposed to smell like without the usual hint of exhaust fumes. By late afternoon, I found the perfect spot to set up camp. a secluded clearing near Lake Crescent. The water shimmered under the fading sunlight, and the only sounds were the rustling leaves and distant bird calls. Not bad for a city slicker, I thought, patting myself on the back. I spent the next hour setting up, unfolded my chair, fired up the portable grill, and even attempted to fish off the lake's edge. The fish seemed unimpressed with my bait, probably mocking me from beneath the surface. Fine, I'll stick to canned beans, I laughed to myself. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I settled by the campfire, enjoying the serenity. The stars began to peek out, more vivid than I'd ever seen. It was humbling, made me realize how small we are. Just tiny specks in a vast universe. Or maybe that was the beans talking. Around 10 p.m., I decided to call it a night. I secured the RV, double-checking the locks, a habit from living in the city. Climbing into bed, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. Maybe I should quit my day job and become a professional camper, I mused before drifting off. A loud thud jolted me awake. Groggy, I glanced at my phone. 1:13 a.m., I listened intently. Another thud, followed by what sounded like metal scraping against metal. Probably just a raccoon, I told myself, though my pulse quickened. Curiosity got the better of me. Grabbing a flashlight, I peered out the window. In the dim glow, I saw a figure near the rear of the RV. Not a raccoon unless they had started wearing jackets and standing upright. "Hey, who's there?" I shouted, hoping to sound more confident than I felt. The figure froze, then slowly turned toward me. The flashlight beam caught his face, a rugged man with unkempt hair and a scruffy beard. His clothes were dirty and torn. He stared at me for a moment before breaking into a wide grin. "Evening, friend," he drawled. "Can I help you?" I asked, gripping the flashlight tighter. "Sorry to bother you," he said, taking a few steps closer. "My name's Roy. Truck broke down a mile back. Mind if I use your phone to call for help?" Something felt off. Maybe it was the odd hour or the fact that there was no vehicle in sight. "I don't have a signal out here," I replied. "Closest ranger station is about 10 miles east." He chuckled softly. "No signal, huh? Mind if I come in and wait till morning then?" I hesitated. "I'm sorry, but I'd prefer if you didn't. Nothing personal." His smile faded. "That's not very neighborly of you." "Look, I can't help you." "Please leave," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He stared at me for a long moment before nodding slowly. "All right, then. You have a good night." He turned and walked back into the darkness. I waited until I could no longer hear his footsteps before exhaling. "That was weird," I muttered. I decided it was best to move on. I started the engine, ready to find a new spot, or maybe head to the ranger station myself. As I shifted into gear, the RV lurched but didn't move. I tried again, nothing. Stepping outside to investigate, I found the rear tires slashed. My heart sank. This was no coincidence. A rustling sound came from the bushes nearby. I spun around, flashlight scanning the tree line. "Who's there?" Silence. Then a low whistle pierced the quiet night. "Looking for me?" Roy stepped out, holding a hunting knife that glinted ominously. "What do you want?" I demanded, backing toward the RV door. He shrugged casually. "Company. It's a lonely night." I bolted inside and slammed the door, locking it. My mind raced. The tires were ruined and there was no cell signal. I needed a plan. A pounding on the door made me jump. "Open up, Adam," he called out. My blood ran cold. How did he know my name? Then I remembered the name tag on my backpack, visible through the window. "Go away," I shouted. He laughed. "We could have been friends, but you had to be rude." I searched the RV for anything that could serve as a weapon. My eyes landed on a flare gun in the emergency kit. Not ideal, but better than nothing. The pounding grew more aggressive. The door hinges creaked under the strain. "Last chance," he warned. I took position at the far end of the RV, flare gun aimed at the door. With a final crash, the door gave way and Roy stepped inside. "Leave me alone," I yelled. He took a step forward. "Or what?" Without hesitation, I fired the flare gun. The bright light shot across the space, striking him in the shoulder. He screamed as his shirt caught fire, stumbling backward out of the RV. Seizing the moment, I grabbed my keys and prayed the engine would cooperate. The RV groaned, but moved slowly forward, riding on the rims. I steered onto the main road, the metal screeching against the asphalt. In the rearview mirror, I saw Roy extinguishing the flames, his face twisted in rage. He didn't give chase, but his eyes bore into me, a silent promise of vengeance. After a grueling hour, I spotted lights ahead. a small gas station, miraculously open. I pulled in, the attendant staring wide-eyed at the damaged RV. "Call the police," I blurted out. "There's a maniac out there who attacked me." He hurried inside to make the call. Minutes later, the place was swarming with officers. I recounted everything, from the initial encounter to the attack. A search team was dispatched, and by dawn, they had Roy in custody. Turns out his real name was Martin Blake, a drifter with a long history of violent crimes. He'd been eluding authorities for months. An officer approached me as I sipped stale coffee inside the station. "You're lucky," he said. "We found evidence at his campsite suggesting he was planning something far worse." I didn't ask for details. Some things are better left unknown. They took my statement and offered medical assistance, but aside from a bruised ego, I was unharmed. The RV, on the other hand, would need some serious repairs. As the sun rose, I thanked the officers and arranged for a tow back to the city. So much for my peaceful getaway. Before leaving, the attendant handed me a fresh cup of coffee. "On the house," he said with a sympathetic smile. "Rough night?" I chuckled. "You could say that. Next time I want to get away, maybe I'll just visit a park in broad daylight." He laughed. Can't argue with that. Back in the city, life returned to its usual pace. The office gossip, the clacking of keyboards, the overpriced lattes. It all felt different now. Maybe I wasn't cut out for the wilderness, or maybe I just had exceptionally bad luck. One thing's for sure, I've got a hell of a story for the next office party, and perhaps an excuse to avoid camping invitations for the foreseeable future. They say nature is healing. I think I'll stick to therapy. My name is Ambrose Shaw, and I'm 30 years old. This happened in the remote woods near Spruce Knob Lake, West Virginia. I thought it would be a fun little adventure. A chance to reconnect with my old friend Mike Carson, who's 31, while writing a travel piece about hidden gems in the Appalachian wilderness. I didn't expect we'd encounter something that would haunt us forever. The trip started out as a mix of nostalgia and practicality. Mike and I used to camp together years ago, back when we both lived in the same town. Life had pulled us in different directions, but I wanted to rekindle that bond and maybe get some good material for my article. When I pitched the idea of camping by the lake, Mike hesitated. "Are you sure about that spot, Ambrose? I've heard weird things about that area," he said. "Come on, Mike, it'll be fine," I replied, brushing off his concerns. "What's the worst that could happen? Bears? We'll keep the food locked up." Reluctantly, he agreed. The following weekend, we loaded up my old RV, a temperamental beast prone to sputtering at the worst times, and headed into the mountains. The drive to Spruce Knob was stunning, with rolling hills and dense forests that seemed to swallow us whole as we ascended the winding roads. We reached the lake just before sunset. The water shimmered in the golden light, and the surrounding trees stood tall and silent, as if guarding the place. A few fishermen waved at us from a distance, but as we drove deeper into the woods to find a secluded campsite, we left the last signs of civilization behind. We parked the RV in a small clearing near the tree line. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. There were no sounds of birds, no rustling leaves, just a heavy, oppressive silence. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just the quiet of nature, and we got to work setting up camp. Mike built a fire while I fiddled with the propane stove, which, true to form, refused to work. "Guess we're doing everything the old-fashioned way," I said with a laugh, though I could tell Mike was annoyed. "Should have brought my own gear," he muttered. "This thing's a death trap." That night, as we sat around the fire, we shared stories and beers, laughing about our old adventures. It felt good, like old times. But as the fire burned low, I started to notice odd things. First, there were the noises. At first, it was faint, like children's laughter carried on the wind. I froze, straining to hear, but when I asked Mike if he heard it, he shook his head. "You're imagining things," he said, tossing another log on the fire. But I wasn't. The laughter grew louder, mingling with what sounded like whispers, though I couldn't make out the words. I glanced over my shoulder at the dark woods, but there was nothing there, just trees and shadows. I told myself it was the wind or maybe a trick of the mind after a long day. Then came the smell. It was faint at first, a sickly sweet odor that made my stomach churn. It reminded me of roadkill left out in the sun for too long. Mike smelled it too, and he looked uneasy for the first time. Maybe a dead deer nearby, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. We went to bed soon after that, locking ourselves inside the RV. I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like something was watching us. The next morning, we decided to explore the woods around the lake. I had my camera slung over my shoulder, ready to capture the natural beauty of the area. But what we found was anything but beautiful. It started with the animal carcasses. We stumbled upon a trail of them, raccoons, rabbits, even a deer, all mutilated in ways that didn't seem natural. Their bodies were arranged in a line, as if they were pointing toward something. My stomach turned, but I couldn't look away. "What the hell did this?" Mike whispered, his face pale. "I don't know," I said. "A bear? Wolves?" But deep down, I didn't believe that. The wounds were too precise, too deliberate. The trail led us to a clearing where an ancient tree stood, its gnarled branches twisting skyward like skeletal fingers. The bark was blackened, as if it had been burned, but the tree was very much alive. It exuded a strange energy, making the air around it feel thick and heavy. A chill ran down my spine just looking at it. "This must be the devil's tree," Mike said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The what?" "I read about it online," he admitted. "Locals say it's cursed. Some witch was hanged here in the 1800s and her spirit supposedly haunts it." "Great. You tell me this now?" I said, half joking. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we shouldn't be there. We didn't stay long. The whispers started again, louder this time, and they seemed to be coming from the tree itself. I snapped a few photos before we retreated back to the RV. Things escalated quickly after that. That night, the whispers returned, but they weren't outside anymore. They were inside the RV. I woke up to the sound of my father's voice calling my name, even though he'd been dead for years. "Ambrose, come here," the voice beckoned. It sounded so real, so warm, that for a moment I believed it. But when I got up and looked outside, there was nothing there. Just the dark woods and the faint outline of the devil's tree in the distance. Mike wasn't doing any better. He claimed he saw me standing outside the RV, staring at him through the window. But I hadn't left my bed. The next morning, we found claw marks on the RV's walls, deep, jagged scratches that hadn't been there before. Mike wanted to leave, but the engine wouldn't start. No matter what we tried, the RV refused to move. "We're stuck here," he said grimly. "We need to figure out how to end this." We decided to confront the tree, though neither of us really knew what we were doing. Armed with a can of lighter fluid and a box of matches, we trekked back to the clearing. The whispers grew louder as we approached, morphing into a cacophony of voices, some pleading, some angry, some crying. My hands trembled as I doused the base of the tree with fluid. "Are you sure about this?" Mike asked, his voice shaking. "No," I admitted, "but we don't have a choice." I struck the match and tossed it onto the tree. The flames roared to life, but almost immediately they were snuffed out as if an unseen hand had smothered them. The air grew cold, and the shadows around us began to move. That's when we saw it, a figure emerging from the tree itself. It was tall and gaunt, with hollow eyes and a mouth that stretched too wide. It didn't move toward us, but its presence was enough to paralyze me with fear. "You trespassed," it said, though its lips didn't move. "Blood for blood." Mike grabbed my arm, snapping me out of my trance. "Run!" he shouted. We bolted back toward the RV. The entity didn't follow us, but its voice echoed in our heads, growing fainter the farther we ran. Back at the RV, we found a knife and debated what to do. The entity wanted blood? Did it mean a sacrifice? I wasn't about to offer myself or Mike, but we had to do something. In a desperate act, I cut my palm, let the blood drip onto the ground outside the RV. I didn't know if it would work, but the whispers stopped almost immediately. The air grew warmer and the oppressive feeling lifted. A moment later, the RV roared to life on its own. Without wasting another second, we got in and drove away, leaving the Devil's Tree. I never wrote about that trip. Not the truth, anyway. The article I published was a generic piece about camping tips and scenic views, but the memory of what happened near Spruce Knob Lake still lingers. I don't know if the entity is gone for good or if it's waiting for the next trespasser to stumble upon its cursed domain. All I know is I'm never going back. I've never been a superstitious man. Ghosts, spirits, curses, all of it felt like nonsense. My wife Sarah was the opposite. She loved all that mystical, spiritual stuff. She'd go on and on about how some places had energies or how she could feel something otherworldly when we'd visit a new place. I used to tease her for it. I didn't mean anything by it. I just never took it seriously. Now I wish I had. It's been almost a year since Sarah died. I still don't know how to talk about it. I don't talk about it, really. I just packed up the RV one day and decided to drive to get away from everything. Her voice, her smile, the way she used to look at me when I'd roll my eyes at her hippie nonsense. It was all too much to deal with, so I left. I wasn't running from her memory exactly. More like I was trying to outrun the guilt that came with it. Sarah always wanted to visit the desert, especially the Navajo Nation. She said Monument Valley was one of the most spiritual places in the world. I never took her. Work got in the way, or my cynicism did. Either way, it never happened. And now, with nothing but miles of empty road ahead of me, I found myself driving right into that part of the world. Maybe it was my way of making up for it. The landscape around me was beautiful in an eerie, desolate way. Massive red rocks rising out of the desert, mesas silhouetted against the setting sun, the kind of place that made you feel small, insignificant. I parked the RV in a remote spot off an unmarked dirt road. No other campers around, just the endless stretch of desert and the towering rock formations in the distance. It was quiet, peaceful even. I thought maybe I'd finally get a decent night's sleep. I stepped out and walked a bit around the RV, taking in the silence. The air was cool, the sky already darkening with the stars beginning to shimmer into view. Sarah would have loved it. As I sat by the small campfire I'd built, poking at the flames, I thought I heard something in the distance. A howl, maybe. Coyotes. I figured it was nothing unusual in a place like this, but the sound was strange, more like a scream than an animal call. I shrugged it off, telling myself it was just the wind. Still, it gnawed at me. Something about the isolation felt different tonight. Heavier. I tried to shake the feeling and headed back into the RV. I locked the door out of habit, but deep down, I knew a lock wouldn't help me feel safe. Not tonight. The first sign that something wasn't right came early the next morning. I'd been outside sipping my coffee and watching the sun rise over the desert when I noticed the tracks. Big, too big to be a coyote. Canine-like, sure, but the prints were deeper, more defined, and there were too many of them. They were circling the RV in a wide arc. I crouched down to get a closer look. The spacing was wrong. Like whatever had made them had a stride far longer than any normal animal. I shook my head. Probably a wolf, I reasoned, even though they weren't supposed to roam this part of the desert. Or maybe a large dog from a nearby ranch. Either way, I wasn't about to get spooked over some tracks. I spent the day hiking, taking in the massive rock formations and the endless red sands. The wind carried whispers through the valleys, but I ignored it. I refused to let my mind play tricks on me. This was supposed to be my reset, my chance to process everything and finally move on. But that night, as the firelight flickered in front of me, I couldn't ignore the feeling that I wasn't alone. The coyotes started up again, at least I assumed they were coyotes, but the howls were different this time. Longer, more drawn out, closer. I told myself it was nothing. Tried to focus on the crackling fire, but the unease crept in anyway. Then I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed movement on the ridge not far from the RV. A figure, tall, humanoid, but wrong somehow. It moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, like it didn't quite know how to walk. I blinked, and it was gone. Swallowed by the shadows. My heart raced. I stood trying to peer into the darkness, but there was nothing out there. Just empty desert. The howl stopped, replaced by an eerie, oppressive silence. I doused the fire quickly and retreated into the RV, locking the door behind me. I laughed at myself, a grown man terrified by shadows in the night. I was just exhausted, that was all. Grief and exhaustion made you see things that weren't there. I repeated that to myself as I crawled into bed, but I couldn't shake the sense that something was watching me. The next morning, I found more tracks. This time, they weren't just around the RV. They led right up to the windows, pressed deep into the sand, circling the vehicle like a predator stalking its prey. I stared at them, unease curdling in my stomach. These prints were bigger than the ones from yesterday. Deeper, too. Something was out here. Something that was getting bolder. I decided to leave. That morning, I packed up my things, double-checked the tires on the RV, and set the GPS for the nearest town. But as soon as I hit the ignition, the engine sputtered. It wouldn't start. "Come on, not now," I muttered, trying again. Nothing. I went outside to check the engine, hoping it was something simple, but when I popped the hood, everything looked fine. There was no reason for the RV to stall like this. Yet there I was, stuck in the middle of nowhere with no cell signal and no way to leave. As the day wore on, that strange feeling of being watched never left. I kept glancing over my shoulder, certain I'd catch sight of that figure again, but the desert was still dead quiet. That night, it came closer. I heard it long before I saw it. Footsteps outside the RV, soft at first, but growing heavier, more deliberate. Something was walking around, pacing as if deciding what to do next. I stayed perfectly still inside, listening as the footsteps circled the RV, stopping near the windows. Then came the scratching. At first, I thought it was a branch scraping against the side of the RV, but the sound was too methodical. It came in short bursts, like claws dragging across metal, testing the strength of the walls. I grabbed the flashlight and crept to the window, slowly pulling back the curtain just an inch. My breath caught in my throat. There, outside in the dark, was the figure I had seen on the ridge. But it was clearer now, standing in the moonlight, just feet from the RV. It wasn't human. At least, not anymore. It looked like a man, but its limbs were wrong. Too long, too thin. Its skin was stretched tight over its bones, and its face, it was shifting, contorting, flickering between the face of a man and that of a coyote. It stopped scratching and turned toward the window, as if it could sense me watching. Its eyes, yellow and gleaming, locked onto mine for a moment. Time seemed to freeze. Then it bared its teeth in a sickening grin. I staggered back, heart pounding in my chest, and stumbled toward the door. I had to get out, had to run. But as soon as my hand reached for the latch, I heard it. "Mark," I froze. "Mark, it's me." The voice, it was Sarah's. Soft, familiar, and filled with the love I hadn't heard in almost a year. I turned slowly, staring at the window. The figure outside had disappeared, but the voice lingered, echoing in the night. "Mark, come outside, please." I shook my head, tears burning in my eyes. No, it couldn't be. It was impossible. Sarah was gone. She was gone. But the voice, it sounded so real. I pressed my hands to my ears, squeezing my eyes shut. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." The voice grew louder, more insistent. "Mark, come to me." I fell to my knees, clutching my head as the scratching returned. More violent this time, as if the creature was trying to claw its way inside. But I didn't open the door. I didn't go outside. The next morning, everything was quiet. No scratches, no footsteps, no voice. I stepped outside and the desert was calm again. The tracks erased by the wind. The RV started without a hitch. I drove away from Monument Valley, leaving the cursed land behind. But the memory of that night, the voice of my wife, the creature in the dark, has followed me ever since. Some things can't be explained. Some things I realize now should never be disturbed. My name is Desmond Adams. I'm 25, a retired firefighter, and this happened in Seneca Creek, backcountry, West Virginia, a year after I lost my wife, Emily. I had planned the trip hoping to find peace or at least distraction in nature. What I found was something I can never forget. It started as a simple RV camping trip, my first time alone. Emily and I had always loved the outdoors, and this seemed like a way to reconnect with that part of my life. Seneca Creek, with its waterfalls and isolation, felt like the perfect place to be alone with my thoughts. I told myself the solitude would help, that it was what I needed. I wasn't ready for what came next. The drive into the backcountry was uneventful. The gravel road leading to the campsite felt endless, hemmed in by towering trees that cast long shadows even in the midday sun. I stopped at a small gas station near the turnoff, where an older woman named Marlene ran the counter. "You're heading into Seneca Creek?" she asked as I paid for firewood and a few snacks. I nodded. "Yeah, just me and the RV." Marlene gave me a strange look, her hand pausing over the register. "Be careful out there," she said, her voice low. "These woods aren't always kind to those traveling alone." I wanted to ask what she meant, but she turned away to help another customer. Her words lingered in my mind as I drove the final stretch. The campsite by Judy Springs was everything I'd hoped for. Quiet, picturesque, and completely isolated. I parked the RV near the creek, the sound of rushing water a soothing backdrop as I unpacked. That first night, I sat by the fire, sipping coffee and staring at the stars. For the first time in months, I felt calm. The first sign that something wasn't right came the next evening. The day had been perfect. I hiked to Seneca Falls, taking photos and jotting notes in a journal I'd started since Emily's death. I even smiled a few times, thinking about how much she would have loved the view. But as I headed back to camp, a strange feeling crept over me. The woods were too quiet. No birds, no rustling leaves, just the sound of my boots on the trail. When I reached the RV, the unease deepened. My firewood, neatly stacked by the pit, was scattered across the ground. At first, I thought an animal had gotten into it, but the pieces were arranged strangely, as if they'd been tossed deliberately. I shrugged it off and rebuilt the fire, telling myself I was imagining things. But that night, as I sat by the flames, I saw it for the first time. A shadow moved between the trees. It wasn't the flicker of firelight. This was deliberate, purposeful, like someone pacing at the edge of the forest. I stood up, my heart pounding. "Hello?" I called out, the sound of my own voice startling me. No response. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it into the trees. Nothing. But as I turned back to the fire, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. A shape, humanoid but wrong, slipped behind a tree, vanishing before I could focus on it. I slept in the RV that night, the doors locked and curtains drawn. The third day brought more unsettling signs. I woke to find muddy footprints leading from the creek to the RV. They were human-like but elongated, the toes too long and splayed. They stopped abruptly a few feet from the door, as if whoever or whatever made them had simply vanished. That afternoon, while hiking to an overlook, I stumbled upon something even stranger, symbols carved into the rocks. They weren't like any markings I'd seen before, almost as if they were burned into the stone. The air felt heavier there, as if the forest were holding its breath. I hurried back to camp, but the unease followed me. That night, the shadows returned. This time, they were closer. I sat by the fire, gripping my flashlight like a weapon. The shadowy figure appeared again, standing motionless at the edge of the trees. It was tall, too tall, and its limbs were unnaturally long. "Who are you?" I shouted, my voice breaking. It didn't move. The fire flickered, the flames shrinking as if smothered by an unseen force. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight, and when I looked again, the figure was gone. By the fourth morning, I'd had enough. I packed up, determined to leave, but the RV wouldn't start. The engine cranked but refused to turn over, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I decided to hike back to the gas station for help. I marked my trail carefully, leaving a breadcrumb of sticks and rocks so I wouldn't get lost. But the forest had other plans. No matter which direction I went, the paths looped back to my campsite. I walked for hours, my legs aching, only to find myself standing in front of the RV again. As the sun set, the shadows returned. This time, there were more of them. Figures moved through the trees, surrounding the campsite, their glowing yellow eyes piercing the darkness. I barricaded myself inside the RV, clutching a flare gun I'd brought for emergencies. The shadows circled outside, their footsteps echoing unnaturally loud against the silence. Then the radio came on. Static filled the air, crackling and distorted before a song began to play, a song I hadn't heard since Emily's funeral. It was her favorite, and hearing it now, made my blood run cold. Her voice followed, faint and pleading. "Desmond, leave." I stared at the radio, my hands trembling. "Emily?" The voice came again, softer this time. "You have to go." The shadows closed in, their forms pressing against the windows of the RV. I fired the flare through the nearest window, the bright red light igniting the darkness. The figures recoiled, their shapes dissolving like smoke. I didn't stop to think. I grabbed the keys and tried the ignition one last time. The engine roared to life. I drove through the night, my hands white-knuckled on the wheel. The forest seemed alive, the trees bending unnaturally as if trying to block my escape. When I finally reached the gas station, Marlene was waiting. She didn't seem surprised to see me, her expression unreadable. "You saw it, didn't you?" she asked. I nodded, unable to speak. Marlene sighed. "It's the Shadow Man. He feeds on people's grief, their fear. He doesn't kill, he traps you, keeps you lost in the dark until there's nothing left." I left West Virginia the next day, vowing never to return. The shadows are gone now, but sometimes, late at night, I hear faint footsteps outside my window, and I wonder if the shadow man ever truly let me go. I'm not sure why I chose the Ocala National Forest. It wasn't really on my radar until a couple of weeks ago. Maybe it's because Megan always talked about it, how beautiful the pine forests were, the springs. She was the nature person, not me. She practically begged me to take her camping here once, back when we were still together. I kept putting it off, using work as an excuse. Now here I am in the middle of the forest, alone in my RV with nothing but my thoughts for company. I needed a break, that's what my doctor said. Unplug, he told me. You need to find yourself again, as if I ever had a real grasp of who I was to begin with. 2 weeks into my forced time off, I wasn't any closer to finding peace or clarity. I felt off. I didn't realize how addicted I was to being connected. No emails, no social media, no news feeds, just silence and isolation. It was what I thought I wanted. The first night in the RV wasn't too bad. I parked in a secluded spot far from the main road, surrounded by towering pine trees. I managed to set up camp without any major problems. I had a fire going, and for a little while I could almost see the appeal Megan always talked about. There was something peaceful about the forest, about the stillness, but it was the kind of stillness that quickly became unsettling when you were alone. By the time the sun set, the silence had grown thick. The only sound was the wind shifting through the pine needles and, every so often, the distant call of an owl. I tried to read one of the survival books I'd brought, but I couldn't focus. My mind kept drifting back to her. Megan? We hadn't spoken since the divorce went through. 3 years of marriage dissolved in less than a month. I couldn't even tell you exactly when things went wrong. I just buried myself in work. She begged me to slow down, to reconnect, but I didn't listen. I told myself I was doing it for us, that the stress was worth it in the end. But by the time I realized how much I'd lost, it was too late. The fire crackled as the temperature dropped. I got up to grab my jacket from inside the RV. That's when I first heard it. A soft tapping sound, like something lightly knocking against the side of the RV. I froze, listening. Tap, tap, tap. I leaned against the door, listening harder. The tapping continued, rhythmic, almost deliberate. I grabbed a flashlight and opened the door, scanning the area around the RV. The light cut through the darkness, but I couldn't see anything. Just trees and shadows. Probably just a branch in the wind, I muttered to myself, though the trees weren't close enough to the RV for that to make sense. I shut the door and locked it. The tapping had stopped, but I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I drifted off, I heard something. Footsteps, rustling things I couldn't explain away as easily as I wanted to. But when I looked outside, the forest was still. The next morning, I found the footprints. They were in the dirt around the RV, large and oddly spaced. Not animal tracks, but not quite human either. They seemed too long, too wide, like someone had been walking on the balls of their feet with unnatural precision. They circled the RV, stopping near the windows before disappearing into the trees. I crouched down to get a better look. The prints were deep, the kind that didn't come from a person casually walking. Whoever or whatever had made them was heavy, deliberate. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, even though there was no one around. I considered leaving, but I wasn't going to let some footprints freak me out. Besides, my RV wouldn't start. No matter how many times I turned the key, the engine just sputtered and clicked. The GPS on my phone was glitchy too, pointing me in all sorts of random directions before it finally went blank. Great. Just great. I spent most of the day walking, trying to calm my nerves. I stuck to the trails at first, but as the hours passed, I wandered deeper into the forest. The pine trees stretched up endlessly, their trunks so straight and uniform that I started losing track of where I was. I didn't mind being lost, not at first. It distracted me from the unease that had settled in my chest. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something, someone, standing just beyond the trees. I stopped dead, staring at the figure. It was tall, too tall, and unnaturally still. I blinked, thinking maybe I'd imagined it, but when I looked again, it was still there. A dark shape, humanoid but wrong, standing among the trees, watching me. I called out, "Hello?" My voice sounded small, swallowed by the forest. The figure didn't move. I took a step toward it, and in an instant it vanished. Not like it walked away, just gone, like it was never there. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I stood there for what felt like forever, staring at the spot where the figure had been, before I finally turned and hurried back toward the RV. That night, the tapping started again. Louder this time, more insistent. I lay in bed, listening, my heart pounding in my chest. The rhythmic tapping echoed around the RV, coming from all sides. It sounded like someone or something was circling the vehicle, knocking at the walls, at the windows. I couldn't bring myself to move. Then the footsteps started. Heavy, deliberate thuds like boots crunching on gravel. They moved slowly, methodically, pacing back and forth outside the RV. I grabbed my flashlight, my hand shaking, and crawled out of bed. "Stop it," I whispered to myself. "You're imagining things. It's nothing." But I wasn't imagining it. I peered through the window, and there it was, the figure, standing just at the edge of the clearing, barely visible in the darkness. Its shape was clearer now. A tall, gaunt figure with limbs that seemed too long, too thin. Its face was hidden in shadow, but I could feel its eyes on me, watching. I stumbled back from the window, heart racing. The tapping grew more frantic, the footsteps louder. My head spun with fear and confusion. What was it? Why was it here? I bolted for the door, but as I reached for the handle, I heard a voice. "David!" I froze. It was Megan's voice, soft, familiar, and unmistakable. "David, come outside." My breath caught in my throat. "Megan," I whispered, barely able to speak. "Come to me." I stared at the door, my hand trembling on the latch. The voice was so clear, so real. But Megan wasn't here. She couldn't be. It wasn't her. "David, please." The voice grew more insistent, more urgent, but something in the tone was wrong. Off. It wasn't her. It couldn't be. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding in my chest. The tapping and footsteps stopped all at once, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, the forest felt different, lighter somehow. The figure was gone, and the RV started on the first try. I didn't waste any time. I packed up and drove away, leaving the forest behind as quickly as I could. But even now, as I sit here writing this, I can't shake the feeling that something is still watching me, that maybe, just maybe, I didn't leave it behind. Some things can't be explained. Some things I realize now are better left undisturbed. My name is Edmund Walker, and back in 2022, I took my RV up to the Glacier National Forest in Montana. I figured escaping the city for a week would do me good, even if my idea of roughing it usually involves forgetting my phone charger. After a grueling year crunching numbers as an accountant, I craved the simplicity of the wilderness. No spreadsheets, no meetings, just me and the great outdoors. I joked with my friends that I'd probably get lost without GPS, but secretly I was excited for an adventure. The drive was serene. Towering pines lined the winding roads, and the crisp mountain air seeped through my open windows. I hummed along to classic rock tunes, feeling lighter with each mile that distanced me from the concrete jungle. Upon arriving at the campground, I noticed it was sparsely populated. Exactly what I wanted. I parked my RV in a secluded spot near a gentle stream. As I set up camp, an older man named Hank strolled over from a nearby site. "First time up here?" he asked, a friendly grin beneath his bushy mustache. "Is it that obvious?" I chuckled, wrestling with a tent pole that seemed determined to defy me. He laughed. "Need a hand?" "Sure, unless you want front row seats to me losing a fight with camping gear." Together, we got the tent pitched in no time. Hank shared a few tips about the area, good fishing spots, trails worth hiking, places to avoid. He mentioned a trail that led to an old abandoned mining town a few miles deeper into the forest. "Why is it abandoned?" I asked. "Just dried up," he said with a shrug, "but some folks say it's haunted." I raised an eyebrow. "Ghost stories already? You work fast." He smiled. "Just keeping the tradition alive. You take care out here." That evening, I built a small campfire and cooked dinner. The stars emerged, brighter than I'd ever seen them. As I sat there, sipping a beer, and I felt a contentment that had eluded me for years. The next morning, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to hike to the old mining town Hank had mentioned. I packed a day bag, grabbed my map, and set off. The trail was overgrown in places, but the path was still visible. About an hour in, I stumbled upon a dilapidated cabin. It looked like it hadn't seen visitors in decades. The door hung ajar, creaking softly in the breeze. I peered inside. Just old furniture covered in dust and cobwebs. Looks like the cleaning service skipped this one, I muttered. Continuing on, I noticed the forest grew denser. The canopy above thickened, filtering the sunlight into dappled patterns on the ground. The air felt cooler, and the sounds of wildlife seemed to fade. After another hour, I reached the remnants of the mining town. Weathered buildings leaned at precarious angles. Windows were shattered, roofs caved in. There was an eerie stillness to the place. I wandered through the main street, or what was left of it, taking in the ghostly atmosphere. As I approached what appeared to be an old general store, I spotted fresh footprints in the dirt. Maybe Hank wasn't kidding about ghosts, I joked to myself, though a prickle of unease ran up my neck. I followed the footprints around the back of the store and found a makeshift campsite. There was a small tent, a smoldering fire pit, and scattered belongings. It looked recently abandoned. "Hello?" I called out. "Anyone here?" No response. I glanced around. There was a notebook lying near the tent. Curiosity piqued. I picked it up. Flipping through the pages, I realized it was filled with handwritten notes, ramblings about purification, cleansing, and making sacrifices to redeem the unworthy. "Well, that's not creepy at all," I whispered, my attempt at humor falling flat. A sudden snap of a twig made me spin around. A man stood a few yards away watching me intently. He was tall and gaunt, with unkempt hair and clothes that looked like they'd been through a war zone. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "You're trespassing," he replied, his voice flat. "Sorry, I didn't realize. I thought this was abandoned." He took a step closer. "It's not. Leave." "All right, no problem. I'll get out of your hair." I placed the notebook back where I found it and started to walk away. Something about the man's gaze unsettled me. As I retraced my steps out of the town, I felt his eyes boring into my back. The return hike seemed longer. Every rustle in the underbrush made me jump. I chided myself for being paranoid. Back at my campsite, I tried to shake off the encounter. I spent the afternoon fishing at the stream, catching nothing but enjoying the tranquility. By evening, I'd almost forgotten about the strange man. As darkness fell, I settled in by the fire with a book. The silence was comforting until it was broken by the distant sound of footsteps. I looked up, expecting to see Hank or another camper, but saw nothing. "Probably an animal," I told myself. An hour later, I heard the footsteps again, closer this time. I stood up, shining my flashlight into the woods. The beam illuminated the trees but revealed nothing else. "Hello? Is someone there?" Silence. Unease crept back in. Deciding it was best to turn in, I locked the RV door and settled into bed. Sleep came fitfully. A loud thud jolted me awake. I sat up, heart pounding. The clock read 2:17 a.m. Holding my breath, I listened intently. Another thud, this time accompanied by the sound of something scraping against the RV's exterior. I crept to the window and peeked out. In the dim moonlight, I saw a figure standing near the fire pit. It was the man from the mining town. He was holding something long and sharp, a machete. "Okay, this is officially not funny," I whispered. He began circling the RV, dragging the machete along the metal side, creating a shrill, grating noise. My mind raced. I reached for my phone to call for help. No signal, of course. "Should have invested in that satellite phone," I muttered. I remembered the flare gun stashed in the emergency kit. Grabbing it, I weighed my options. Firing it might scare him off or attract help. As I contemplated, a voice called out, "Come out, we need to talk." "Yeah, I bet we do," I said under my breath. He banged on the door. "You're contaminated. You need cleansing." "Fantastic. A lunatic." "Leave now or I'll call the police," I shouted. He laughed, a hollow, chilling sound. "They can't help you out here." I loaded the flare gun, aimed it at the door, and waited. Suddenly, the window beside me shattered. I stumbled back as his arm reached through, swiping the machete wildly. Without thinking, I fired the flare gun. The flare struck his arm, igniting his sleeve. He screamed, pulling back and stumbling away from the RV. Seizing the moment, I grabbed my keys, dashed to the driver's seat, and started the engine. The RV roared to life. I slammed it into gear, knocking over camping chairs and supplies as I sped down the dirt road. In the side mirror, I saw the man standing in the middle of the road, flames flickering on his arm, watching me disappear into the night. My hands trembled on the wheel. I needed to get to safety. The nearest ranger station was miles away, but I didn't dare stop. After what felt like an eternity, I saw lights ahead, the ranger station. I reported what happened. They took our statements, looked through the torn-up clothes, and even brought in a few other rangers to comb through the area. One of them, an older guy, pulled me aside, mentioning that they'd been tracking rumors of people disappearing around those woods for years, but had never found enough evidence to act on it. He muttered about strange types that passed through Glacier, but when I asked if he'd ever heard of Rick, he just shook his head, looking uneasy. The woman I'd saved never gave me her name, just thanked me before hitching a ride out of town with another ranger. I can't blame her for wanting to put as much distance between herself and that place as possible. Later, I heard a few of the rangers talking about what they'd found when they checked the site we'd escaped from. More clothes, scattered bones. Not animal bones either. They were all arranged in strange patterns like some twisted display. The older ranger looked at me and said it seemed like some kind of ritual, a grim collection of people who'd like never be identified. He didn't say more, but I saw it in his face. Whatever they'd found, it was enough to disturb even a man who'd seen just about everything. I packed up my RV that night, left Glacier National Park, and never looked back. Whatever Rick was doing out there, whatever twisted purpose drove him, I wanted no part of it. He'd shown me exactly what he was capable of, and I had no doubt he'd keep going, with or without us. And as I crossed state lines, I kept seeing his face in my mind, that eerie calm, the way he talked about his subjects. I thought this trip would fix everything. I thought that a week out in the woods, just me and Tyler, would somehow repair the damage from the past year. The divorce hit him harder than it hit me, and that's saying something. I thought maybe out here in the quiet, away from the distractions of phones and the city, we could connect again, like fathers and sons are supposed to. But from the moment we hit the road, I knew it wasn't going to be easy. Tyler barely looked up from his phone the entire drive, earbuds in, scrolling mindlessly. He didn't care about the scenery, didn't care that we were headed to Deadwood Creek, a place I used to go with my own dad when I was his age. It's funny how history repeats itself. My father and I never really saw eye to eye either. He'd brought me out here, hoping to teach me how to be a man, how to survive in the wilderness, and now here I was, doing the same with Tyler, hoping the Black Hills would heal something in both of us. I glanced at him as we pulled into the campground. He didn't even notice the tall, dark pines surrounding us, swaying lightly in the wind. A dense fog had settled over the creek, and the sound of water trickling nearby was the only noise besides the RV's engine. It felt different than I remembered, more isolated, lonelier. "This is it," I said, more to myself than to Tyler. "Cool," he mumbled, still scrolling, not even looking up. I sighed, cutting the engine. After we set up camp, I suggested a short hike to check out the creek. Tyler grumbled but followed me. The trail was just as I remembered, narrow, winding through the trees, with the creek gurgling beside us. There was something peaceful about it, but also something off. The further we went, the heavier the air felt, like the forest was watching us. We reached the creek's edge, where the water ran fast over the rocks. I crouched down, letting the cool water run over my hand. "This place used to be full of miners back in the gold rush days," I said, trying to make conversation. "A lot of people came out here looking to strike it rich. Some of them didn't make it out." Tyler shrugged. "I guess," he said. I stood up and brushed off my hands, frustrated. You could try enjoying this." He looked up from his phone for the first time and scowled. "I didn't ask to come here." I bit my tongue, was holding back the argument that wanted to burst out. "Let's head back to camp." As we turned to leave, something flickered in my peripheral vision. I stopped, squinting through the trees. There, just at the edge of the clearing, a dim light floated in the distance. It flickered like a lantern, swaying in the wind. "Did you see that?" I asked, pointing toward the trees. Tyler glanced up, following my gaze. "What? That light?" It was gone. I blinked, rubbing my eyes. Maybe I'd imagined it. So the fog had thickened while we were by the creek, and the woods were growing darker. Never mind. Let's go. The first night was when things started getting weird. Tyler and I had retreated to the RV after dinner. He was predictably glued to his phone, while I tried to read a book, but the quiet gnawed at me. The stillness outside felt oppressive, rather than peaceful. The wind had picked up, and the pines swayed ominously against the backdrop of the night. Then I heard it. At first, I thought it was just the wind, a soft, barely there sound like whispers carried on the breeze. But as I listened, it grew more distinct. Not the wind. Voices. Faint, disembodied voices murmuring just outside the RV. "Did you hear that?" I asked, sitting up straighter. "What?" Tyler didn't even look up. "The voices outside." Tyler pulled out one of his earbuds, frowning. "What are you talking about?" I stood up and went to the window, peering out into the darkness. Nothing but fog and trees, but I could still hear the whispers, just at the edge of hearing, like they were coming from the creek. I shook my head. Probably just the wind. Tyler rolled his eyes and went back to his phone, but something about those whispers unsettled me. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The next morning, the air felt even heavier. Tyler was still distant, sulking around camp, so I suggested another hike, hoping it would clear the tension between us. He reluctantly agreed, and we set off down the trail again, heading back toward the creek. But this time, the unease I'd felt the day before was stronger. Every rustle in the trees, every crack of a branch set me on edge. As we walked, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder. The feeling of being watched was constant now, like eyes were following us from the shadows. Then I saw it again. The light. This time, it was brighter, flickering between the trees ahead of us, moving slowly like a lantern being carried by an unseen hand. "There it is," I whispered, grabbing Tyler's arm. "Do you see it?" He stopped, frowning. What are you talking about?" The light flickered in and out, growing dimmer before vanishing completely. I took a step forward, but Tyler grabbed my arm. "Dad, let's just go back." I wanted to argue, but the look on his face, the fear in his eyes, stopped me. Truth be told, I was scared too. "Yeah, let's go." That night, the footsteps started. It was late, maybe past midnight, and I just managed to drift off when I heard them. Slow, deliberate steps, crunching on the gravel outside the RV. At first, I thought it was just an animal, maybe a deer or something, but the steps were too heavy, too purposeful. I lay there, holding my breath, listening as the footsteps circled the RV. They stopped by the window, then moved to the door. Tyler stirred in his sleep but didn't wake. Thus, I slipped out of bed and grabbed the flashlight. My heart pounded in my chest as I crept toward the window, slowly pulling back the curtain. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, and there, just at the edge of the light, stood a figure. It was tall, dressed in ragged, old-fashioned clothes like something out of the Gold Rush era. A wide-brimmed hat covered most of its face, but I could see the gleam of a lantern hanging from its hand. The figure stood perfectly still, just watching the RV. I stumbled back, heart racing. I didn't know what to do. My mind raced, searching for a rational explanation, but I couldn't find one. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure turned and vanished into the fog, the light of its lantern disappearing with it. The next day, Tyler was pale and jittery, his usual teenage indifference replaced with genuine fear. He hadn't seen the figure, but he'd heard the footsteps, and the look in his eyes told me he knew something was wrong. "We need to leave," he said, his voice trembling. "I know," I replied. "I'll start the RV. We'll head out." But when I turned the key in the ignition, nothing happened. The engine sputtered, then went silent. I tried again and again, but the RV wouldn't start. "We're stuck here," I muttered, feeling the weight of dread settle over me. That night, the footsteps returned. This time, they were louder, more insistent. The figure was back, pacing around the RV, dragging something behind it. I could hear the heavy scrape of metal on gravel, like chains being dragged along the ground. "Dad, what is that?" Tyler whispered, his face pale with fear. I didn't have an answer. I grabbed the flashlight and stepped toward the door. "Stay inside," I told him. "No, don't go out there," he begged, grabbing my arm. But I couldn't just sit there, listening to the thing outside. I had to confront it. I opened the door and stepped out into the cold night. The figure was there, standing by the creek, its lantern casting an eerie glow over the water. It didn't move as I approached, just watched me with shadowed eyes. "What do you want?" I shouted, though my voice trembled. "What are you?" The figure didn't respond. Instead, it slowly lifted its arm, pointing to the ground near the water's edge. There, half buried in the mud, was an old, rusted gold pan. I didn't understand at first, but then it hit me. The legend. The miner's ghost protecting his lost fortune. I knelt down, my hands trembling, and lifted the pan from the mud. As soon as I touched it, the figure vanished. The footsteps stopped. The whispers and the wind fell silent. The air was lighter. The oppressive weight lifted. I stood there for a long time, holding the gold pan, my mind racing. Then, without looking back, I turned and went back to the RV. The next morning, the RV started without a hitch. We left Deadwood Creek behind, and neither of us spoke about what happened. But as we drove away, I couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the figure watching us from the trees. I didn't, but I knew deep down that something had happened out there. Something I couldn't explain. Something I would never forget. And maybe, just maybe, Tyler and I would be okay. My name is Cedric Janis. I'm 23 years old, and this happened last October in Blackwater Falls State Park, West Virginia. I had just landed my first solo freelance assignment, a travel feature for an outdoor magazine. It was my chance to prove to myself, and maybe to a few others, that I could thrive on my own after leaving a toxic relationship. I didn't expect the park's breathtaking beauty to be marred by whispers of the past, or that those whispers would grow louder with each passing night. When I first arrived, the park was everything I'd hoped for. My RV fit snugly into a secluded campsite overlooking the gorge, the roar of the falls constant in the distance. Blackwater Falls was a photographer's dream. Cascading water, mist rising through the gorge, and vibrant autumn foliage painted in fiery reds and oranges. The first day was perfect. I hiked, shot hundreds of photos, and scribbled notes about the trails and wildlife. The peace and quiet were a balm, exactly what I needed after months of turmoil. That evening, I sat by the fire, sipping tea and scrolling through my shots. That's when I saw it for the first time. At the edge of one frame, a figure stood between two trees. It was a man, his clothes ragged and his face shadowed. I frowned, zooming in, but the details remained blurred. I didn't remember seeing anyone during my hike, and the figure hadn't appeared in any other photos. I shook it off as an optical illusion, probably a trick of light and shadows, and went to bed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The second day brought strange encounters. I started the morning by stopping at the visitor center, hoping to get some local insight. The woman behind the counter, Maggie, was friendly, but seemed to be watching me too closely. She eyed my camera gear and smiled knowingly. "Planning to photograph the falls?" she asked. "That's the idea," I replied. Maggie hesitated, her smile faltering. "Be careful around the falls, especially near dusk. The dead don't like company." I blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" Before I could ask more, she turned to help another guest, leaving me with a vague unease. Later, on a trail to the falls, I ran into Gary, a park ranger. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a weathered face and a genial demeanor. As he gave me a quick overview of the park's history, I brought up Maggie's warning. He chuckled. "Oh, that's just local folklore. Back in the Civil War, there was a Confederate soldier who hid out in the gorge. They say he deserted his regiment and was hunted down near the falls. Some folks claim his spirit never left, but I've worked here for years and never seen a thing." I tried to laugh with him, but his words stayed with me. That evening, the first real sign of something unnatural occurred. I set up my tripod near the falls, hoping to capture the golden hour light. As I framed the shot, my breath caught. The air around me had turned frigid, my breath fogging in front of me despite the mild weather. My camera refused to focus, the lens shuddering as if something was blocking it. And then, faint but unmistakable, I heard whispers. I spun around, expecting to see other hikers, but I was alone. The whispers grew louder, overlapping and indecipherable, like a crowd speaking just out of earshot. The unease became unbearable, and I packed up in a rush, leaving the falls as the last light of day faded. That night, back at the RV, I reviewed the day's photos. Most were stunning, the falls bathed in warm, golden light. But in 3 of them, the figure from the previous day appeared again. This time, he was closer, standing at the edge of the water. His face was clearer now, pale, gaunt, with dark hollows where his eyes should have been. And in the last photo, he was staring directly at the camera. I slammed my laptop shut and locked the RV door. The next morning, I debated cutting the trip short, but a part of me couldn't let it go. I'd always prided myself on being rational, and I wasn't going to let a few strange occurrences ruin my assignment. While hiking near the falls, I noticed an overgrown side trail. Curiosity tugged at me, and I followed it, ducking beneath low-hanging branches. It led to a clearing where the air felt heavier, almost oppressive. In the center of the clearing was a patch of disturbed earth, as though something had been buried there long ago. Nearby, I found an object half buried in the dirt, a weathered leather journal. The pages were brittle but legible, written in a looping, old-fashioned script. The entries told the story of a Confederate soldier who had deserted his regiment and fled into the gorge. His words were filled with fear and desperation. "The nights grow colder, and I hear them coming. I cannot outrun my fate," the last entry read. "They will find me tonight. I will not see another sunrise." I closed the journal, my hands trembling. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the oppressive feeling returned. The RV's lights flickered, and shadows danced across the walls, moving in ways that didn't match the firelight outside. And then I saw him. The soldier stood at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the firelight. He didn't move, didn't blink, but his hollow eyes locked onto mine. My chest tightened with fear as I realized he wasn't alone. Shadows emerged from the trees, darker and more twisted, their forms writhing like smoke. They whispered accusations, voices overlapping in a cacophony. "Traitor. Coward. You will not leave." Panicking, I grabbed the journal and held it up. "Is this what you want?" I shouted. The soldier's expression shifted, sadness, perhaps gratitude, and he gestured toward the disturbed earth I'd seen earlier. I understood. Clutching the journal, I ran back to the clearing. The shadows followed, their whispers growing louder, more insistent. My hands shook as I placed the journal on the grave and whispered a quiet prayer for peace. The air around me grew still. The shadows stopped, their forms dissolving into the night. The soldier lingered for a moment longer, his hollow eyes softening before fading into the mist. By morning, the oppressive feeling had lifted. The forest seemed brighter, the air lighter, and for the first time in days, I felt safe. Before leaving, I stopped at the visitor center to return the journal. Maggie was there, her knowing smile greeting me. "You helped him, didn't you?" she asked, her voice soft. I nodded, unsure how to respond. She reached out, patting my hand. "He's free now. You did a good thing." As I drove away from Blackwater Falls, I realized the experience had changed me. I didn't have all the answers, but I no longer felt the weight of doubt and fear that had followed me into the park. Sometimes the past lingers in ways we can't explain, and sometimes all it takes to move forward is to lay it to rest. I've always loved the quiet. That's the real reason I camp alone and hike alone. It's not about proving anything to anyone. It's about the silence. The kind of silence that presses against you like a weight, smoothing out the chaos of everyday life. Out here, far from deadlines and the blaring traffic, I can hear my own thoughts. But it's a fragile thing, the peace that the wilderness offers. I've learned that the quiet can also play tricks on you, turn on you. That's what happened to me in the San Juan National Forest. I'd been camping alone plenty of times before, but this trip was different. I still have trouble putting it into words. All I know is that the silence stopped being my friend somewhere on the second day. I'd planned to be out there for 4 days, just long enough to clear my head and reset. The spot I'd picked was remote, a stretch of dense forest near Pagosa Springs that even the locals didn't visit often. It was perfect, or so I thought. The first day went like it always does. The drive up was uneventful, and after a few hours of hiking, I found the perfect campsite. It was tucked away by a creek, surrounded by towering pines, with a small clearing just big enough for my tent and fire pit. I felt that familiar rush of excitement as I set up camp, the freedom of being out here completely alone, with nothing but wilderness around me. That first night was easy. I sat by the fire, listening to the water rush over the rocks in the creek. I wrote in my journal a bit, mostly just notes about the hike and some thoughts about work. Then I crawled into my tent, ready to sleep. The silence was comforting at first, as it always is, but I woke up in the middle of the night to something strange. It was subtle, just a faint whispering sound, like the wind picking up through the trees. I brushed it off, telling myself it was nothing, and eventually drifted back to sleep. The next day, things started to go wrong. I woke up later than I'd planned, the sky already a pale blue overhead. My stove was acting up, which was weird because it had worked fine the night before. It just wouldn't light, no matter what I tried. I ended up eating cold granola and packing up my camp, ready to move deeper into the forest. That's when I noticed my GPS wasn't working. I'd had reception when I camped here before, but now my phone was useless, no signal at all. I wasn't worried yet, though. I'd brought a map, and I knew the area well enough to navigate without technology. Still, the feeling that something wasn't right settled in, and I couldn't shake it. The hike was harder than I expected. My legs felt heavier, like the air itself was weighing me down, and the forest was quiet, too quiet. Normally, you'd hear birds or the occasional rustle of squirrels in the underbrush, but today, it was just still. The silence felt unnatural. I found another campsite by late afternoon, a little farther into the woods next to a meadow that looked untouched. I set up my tent quickly, eager to get a fire going, but as I worked, the feeling of being watched crept up on me. I couldn't shake it. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, nothing was there, just trees and shadows, but the sensation wouldn't leave. That night, I heard the whispers again. This time, they were louder, clearer, and they weren't random. They were saying something. My name. I sat up in my tent, my heart pounding. The sound was faint but unmistakable, drifting on the breeze from somewhere just beyond the clearing. I grabbed my flashlight, unzipped the tent, and shone the light into the trees. Nothing. The forest was still, the fire flickering in the corner of my vision. I stood there for a long time, listening, but the whispering had stopped. It was just the wind. It had to be. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. By the third day, I was exhausted. I hadn't slept much the night before, and the feeling of unease had only grown stronger. My gear wasn't cooperating either. When I tried to pack up my tent, I found that the poles had bent. They were new, barely used, but somehow they were warped, like something had twisted them while I slept. It didn't make sense. The whispering was back too, even during the day. It followed me as I hiked, and a faint sound on the edge of hearing, like someone walking just out of sight. I kept telling myself it was the wind, but deep down I knew something wasn't right. I wasn't alone out here. Then there was the whistling. It started around midday, just after I'd set up my third camp. At first I thought it was a bird, but the sound was too deliberate, too human. It came from somewhere deep in the woods, a high, clear note that echoed through the trees. I froze, listening. The sound grew louder, closer, then stopped as suddenly as it had begun. I called out, hoping it was another hiker, someone who'd stumbled across my camp, but there was no response, just silence. I tried to stay calm, but the sense of being watched was overwhelming. Now it felt like something was circling me, just beyond my vision, waiting. That night, the whispers didn't stop. I lay in my tent, wide awake, listening as the sound of my name drifted through the trees. It was faint at first, like it had been the night before, but as the hours passed, it grew louder, more insistent. Dylan. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, the cold night air biting at my skin. The fire had died down, casting long, flickering shadows across the clearing. I scanned the trees, heart racing, but there was nothing. Just darkness. I was about to crawl back into my tent when I saw something move, a shadow slipping between the trees. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It was too big to be an animal, and it was moving too deliberately, like it was watching me, waiting. I turned off my flashlight and backed into the tent, my mind racing. I'd never been this scared in the woods before, not once in all the years I'd camped alone. But now, there was something out there. I could feel it. I zipped the tent shut and tried to calm my breathing, but the whispers were inside my head now. They weren't just outside, they were all around me. Dylan. Dylan. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat in my tent, clutching the flashlight, listening as the whispers circled me. Sometimes it sounded like one voice, sometimes several, but it was always the same soft, insistent calling my name. By dawn, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed up my gear as quickly as I could, my hands shaking. I didn't care where I was going anymore. I just needed to get out of these woods. But as I started hiking, the whistling began again. This time it was closer, following me like something was walking just behind me, whistling a slow, eerie tune. I didn't stop to look. I didn't want to see whatever it was. I just kept walking, faster and faster, until I was practically running down the trail. But then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me. I froze, heart pounding in my chest, and slowly turned around. There, standing just at the edge of the clearing, was a figure. It was tall and thin, its skin pale and stretched tight over its bones. Its eyes were hollow and its lips were curled into a grin. It stood there, staring at me, its head cocked to the side as if amused. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The whistling had stopped, and now there was only silence. A silence so thick it pressed down on me like a weight. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching me, waiting. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in place, but eventually I turned and ran. I ran until my legs burned and my lungs felt like they were going to burst. I didn't stop until I reached the trailhead where my car was parked. When I finally looked back, the figure was gone. I never told anyone what happened in the San Juan National Forest. Not really. I tried to explain it to myself 1,000 different ways. Exhaustion, anxiety, maybe even altitude sickness. But none of that explains the whispers, or the whistling, or the figure that watched me from the trees. I haven't been camping since. I thought the desert would heal me. Red Rock Canyon was supposed to be a place to clear my head, to sit in silence and let the vast, empty land take away the chaos of the last few months. I'd lost everything, my wife, my job, and I needed something, anything, to remind me there was still some peace left in the world. Instead, it felt like I'd driven into a nightmare. I parked the RV at the far end of the campground, as far away from the few other campers as I could get. I wanted solitude to think, or maybe to stop thinking. I wasn't sure. The sun was setting as I stepped out, casting a deep orange glow across the red sandstone cliffs. It was beautiful, the kind of beauty that made you feel small, like the world was too big for you to matter. Maybe that's what I needed. I'd been driving for hours, with only the occasional crackle of the radio for company. The RV was old, creaking and groaning as I navigated the winding roads into the canyon. It had seen better days, much like me. As I stretched, a low rumble came from under the hood. "Great," I muttered, giving the RV a half-hearted kick. The engine had been acting up for days, but I figured I could deal with it later. I wasn't here for that. I was here to get away, to let the emptiness of the desert swallow me whole. That night, after I'd settled in, I sat outside the RV, staring up at the stars. Out here, away from the city, the sky was incredible. Clear, endless. But as the stars twinkled overhead, I noticed something strange. At first, I thought they were planes, blinking in and out far above the canyon. But then they moved too fast, too erratically. I leaned forward, squinting. There were 3 of them, glowing faintly blue, darting through the sky in impossible patterns. They weren't planes. I wasn't sure what they were. I stood up, straining my neck to follow their path as they circled overhead. They blinked off one by one, and the desert was silent again. Just stars, I told myself, even though I knew it wasn't true. The next morning, I woke up to find the RV's battery almost dead. My phone, which I'd left charging overnight, hadn't gained a single bar. I tried turning the engine over, but all I got was a dull click. My chest tightened. Being stranded in the middle of the desert wasn't part of the plan. I had enough food and water for a few days, sure, but the isolation was starting to feel less like a retreat and more like a trap. Milo's RV was parked a few spots down, his beat-up RV sitting in the shade of a large rock formation. He waved me over as I stepped out of mine, a wide grin on his sunburned face. "Morning," he called. "Beautiful day, huh?" I forced a smile. "Yeah, sure. Hey, you wouldn't happen to have jumper cables, would you?" Milo scratched his scruffy chin, then shook his head. "Sorry, friend, but I can give you a ride into town later if you need help. It's not too far." I thanked him, but something about Milo unsettled me. Maybe it was how relaxed he seemed, like this place wasn't bothering him at all. As I stood there, he tilted his head toward the canyon walls. "You see the lights last night?" he asked. I froze. "Yeah, what were they?" He shrugged like it was nothing. "Oh, those things. People talk about them all the time. Could be military, could be something else. No one really knows, but they've been around as long as I've been camping out here." I laughed nervously. "Something else, huh?" Milo smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "People say they're not from this world. I don't know about that, but sometimes they follow you. Just don't go too far out at night and you'll be fine." I forced another laugh, but my stomach churned. Milo's tone was too casual, too accepting. I thanked him again and went back to my RV, trying to shake off the feeling that I was missing something important. The day dragged on, the heat baking the ground beneath my feet. I spent the afternoon hiking a short trail near the campground, trying to clear my head, but the vast emptiness only made me feel more alone. I kept thinking about the lights, about how they'd moved, how they seemed to watch me. That night, they returned. I was sitting outside again, nursing a warm beer and staring at the sky when I saw them, 3 faint blue lights hovering over the canyon. This time, they were closer. Too close. They flickered almost playfully, darting back and forth like they were searching for something. I stood up, my heart pounding. It didn't make sense. Nothing about this place made sense. I backed toward the RV, never taking my eyes off the lights, but as I reached for the door, the lights blinked out. Gone. Just like that. A cold breeze swept through the canyon, and I shivered. It was too quiet. No wind, no insects, nothing. Just the dead, suffocating silence of the desert. Then the RV lights flickered once, twice, and went dark. My chest tightened as I stumbled into the RV, fumbling for the flashlight. I clicked it on, but the beam was weak, barely cutting through the darkness. The electrical panel was dead, and my phone wouldn't turn on. Every piece of technology I had was failing, and I had no idea why. A sudden knock on the door made me jump. "Chris, you okay?" It was Emily, the hiker I'd met earlier that day. She'd pitched her tent nearby, planning to stay for a few nights before heading out. I opened the door, trying to hide my panic. "Yeah, just some electrical issues," I said, forcing a smile. "Everything's dead. I'm guessing the battery's shot." Emily frowned, glancing back at her tent. "That's weird. My phone's dead too, and my flashlight keeps flickering." Her voice was calm, but I could see the worry in her eyes. She felt it too, the strangeness in the air, the weight of the silence. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Do you think it's the lights?" Milo told me about them earlier, said people disappear sometimes. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my breathing steady. "Disappear?" Emily nodded, her gaze drifting toward the canyon. "Yeah, it's mostly stories, but you seem pretty convinced." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air felt thick, heavy, like the desert was closing in on us. I wasn't sure if I believed in Milo's campfire tales, but the lights, they were real and they weren't natural. "We should get out of here," Emily said, breaking the silence. "I don't like this." "I can't," I replied. "My RV won't start." She hesitated, then nodded. "Mine either. I tried earlier, but it's completely dead." We stood there, staring at each other, the weight of the situation sinking in. Something was wrong with this place. The lights weren't just an oddity, they were doing something, affecting everything around us, and we were stuck miles from any help. "We'll wait till morning," I said, trying to sound confident. "Maybe it's just a temporary glitch. We'll figure it out." Emily didn't look convinced, but she nodded and headed back to her tent. I locked the RV door behind her, though I wasn't sure what good it would do. That night, I barely slept. The silence was oppressive, like a blanket wrapped too tight around me. Every creak of the RV, every gust of wind made my heart race. I kept waiting for the lights to come back, to hover outside my window, but they didn't. Instead, I woke up sometime in the early hours, drenched in sweat, my head pounding. I sat up, blinking in the darkness. Something was wrong. I glanced at my watch. It was 4 a.m., but that didn't make sense. I'd checked the time just moments ago, and it had been midnight. Where had the hours gone? I stumbled outside, feeling disoriented. The air was cooler now, the desert's chill settling in. The stars were out, but there was no sign of the lights. My mind was foggy, like I'd been dreaming. But the dust on my boots told me I'd been walking. But where? And why? Panic surged through me. I couldn't remember. Hours were missing, and I had no idea what had happened. The lights were playing with us, toying with our sense of reality. I ran toward Emily's tent, calling her name, but when I got there, she was gone. Her tent was empty, her pack still there, but she was nowhere to be found. "Emily!" I shouted, my voice echoing off the canyon walls. Nothing. The only sound was the wind. I backed away, my heart hammering in my chest. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. But the lights, the missing time, it all pointed to one terrifying conclusion. We weren't alone. I sprinted back to my RV, slamming the door behind me, and tried the engine again. To my shock, it roared to life. The headlights flickered on, and I didn't hesitate. I jammed the gear shift into drive and tore out of the campsite, gravel kicking up behind me as I sped down the winding canyon road. I glanced in the rearview mirror for just a second. I saw them, the blue lights, hovering in the distance, watching me leave. I didn't stop driving until I hit the outskirts of Las Vegas. The neon lights of the city felt like a lifeline. But even then, as I pulled into a gas station, my hands shaking, I couldn't shake the feeling that the lights were still out there, waiting, and I wasn't sure if I'd really escaped at all. I'm Donovan Huxley, and back in 2022, I decided to take my RV up to the remote stretches of the Porcupine Mountains in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. As a graphic designer more acquainted with pixels than pine trees, I thought a solo trip might spark some creativity, or at least give me a funny story to tell at the next office party. I packed more gadgets than gear, thinking my tablet and a portable Wi-Fi hotspot would be enough to keep me connected. My buddies laughed, saying I'd be back within a day begging for a decent latte, but I was determined to prove them wrong. After all, how hard could camping be when your bed has wheels and there's a mini fridge stocked with craft beer? The drive was uneventful, save for the occasional deer darting across the winding roads. The autumn leaves painted the landscape in fiery hues, and I couldn't help but feel a surge of optimism. Maybe this nature thing wasn't so bad after all. I pulled into an isolated campground, the kind where you have to fill out a slip and drop it into a box because there's no ranger station. As I set up, a beat-up pickup truck rattled past, its driver giving me a long, scrutinizing stare. He was an older man with a weathered face sporting a beard that could house a family of sparrows. I gave a friendly wave, but he just spat out the window and drove on. "Well, nice to meet you too," I muttered, shaking my head. Night fell quicker than I expected. I settled into my RV, flicking on the interior lights and firing up a movie on my tablet. Halfway through, the Wi-Fi cut out. Figures. I decided to step outside to get some fresh air. The silence was thick, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the distant hoots of owls. Taking a deep breath, I savored the crisp air when I noticed a faint glow deeper in the woods. Curiosity piqued, I grabbed my flashlight. This is how horror movies start, I joked to myself, but ventured forth anyway. As I approached, the glow sharpened into the flicker of a campfire. There, in a small clearing, stood a group of people in a circle, their faces obscured by hooded cloaks. Great, I've stumbled upon a cult meeting. Just my luck, I thought. I was about to back away slowly when one of them turned abruptly, revealing a pale face with sharp features. His eyes locked onto mine, and a sly grin spread across his lips. Well, looks like we have an unexpected guest," he called out. The others turned in unison, their gazes piercing through the darkness. "Sorry to intrude," I stammered. "I was just enjoying a walk and saw your fire." "Join us," he said, motioning with a gloved hand. "We were just getting started." Every rational part of me screamed to leave, but politeness overrode common sense. "Sure, why not?" I said, walking into the clearing. The warmth of the fire did little to ease the chill crawling up my spine. Up close, their cloaks appeared tattered, and a strange symbol was stitched onto the fabric, a triangle entwined with a serpent. "We're celebrating the harvest," another member said, her voice smooth like honey but with an unsettling undertone. "Cool. I didn't bring any snacks, though," I quipped, hoping humor might lighten the mood. "No matter," the leader replied. "We have plenty to share." They began chanting in a language I didn't recognize. The flames danced higher, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. I glanced around, noticing that there were no tents or supplies, just the fire and the people. "Well, this has been fun, but I should probably head back," I said, taking a step backward. "Stay," the leader insisted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "The ritual is incomplete without a proper offering." "Offering?" I laughed nervously. "I think I'll pass on that." Before I could turn, two members grabbed my arms with a grip stronger than their slender frames suggested. Panic surged through me. "Hey, let go!" The leader approached, pulling back his hood to reveal a bald head etched with scars forming the same symbol on their cloaks. "You stumbled upon us for a reason. The woods guide those who are meant to join." I struggled, but their hold tightened. "Look, I'm just a guy who got lost. I didn't see anything." "Precisely," he smiled. You're nobody. A perfect vessel. They dragged me toward a makeshift altar, a flat stone slab stained dark. My heart pounded as adrenaline kicked in. In a burst of desperation, I stomped hard on the foot of the person to my right. He yelped, loosening his grip just enough for me to wrench free. Without thinking, I bolted into the woods. Branches whipped against my face as I ran blindly, the chants morphing into shouts behind me. My lungs burned, but fear propelled me forward. I could hear footsteps gaining, leaves crunching under heavy boots. Help! I screamed into the void, knowing full well that I was miles from anyone who could hear. Suddenly, a blinding light flooded the area. Freeze! State police, a voice boomed. The leader recoiled as officers emerged from all sides, weapons drawn. Stunned, I watched as they apprehended the cult members one by one. An officer helped me to my feet. Are you okay? I think so, I gasped. How did you find me? We've been tracking this group for months, he explained. Got a tip they were operating in this area. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. A scream pierced the night, a guttural, inhuman wail that didn't seem possible from a human throat. What was that? I whispered. The officer's face paled. Stay here. He moved toward the sound, hand hovering over his holster. Against better judgment, I followed at a distance. The officers converged on a clearing where they found a grisly scene. A shallow pit filled with bones, some animal, others unmistakably human. The remains were arranged in grotesque patterns, and the stench was overwhelming. One of the officers retched. Looks like we found their dumping ground, another muttered grimly. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. This wasn't just some harmless group of oddballs. They were killers. Maybe worse. The night stretched on as statements were taken and evidence collected. Eventually, they escorted me back to my RV. We'll have someone keep an eye on you tonight, the officer assured me. But you should be safe now. Safe, right? I nodded absently, still processing the night's events. Inside the RV, I locked every door and window, then double-checked them for good measure. Exhaustion hit me like a freight train, but sleep was a distant possibility. I sat at the small kitchenette table, nursing a cold beer, the kind of liquid courage that does nothing after the fact. Morning light seeped through the blinds, and with it came a knock on the door. I flinched but relaxed when I saw it was the officer from the night before. Mind if we talk? He asked. Sure. I opened the door, and he stepped in, removing his hat. We've identified the group's leader, named Silas Crowley, he said, flipping open a notebook. Former anthropology professor who went off the grid after some controversial research. Controversial how? Obsession with ancient rituals, human sacrifices, the works. He attracted a following of like-minded individuals. We've been trying to pin him down for a while. A chill ran through me. So I just stumbled into a homicidal maniac's backyard? Pretty much, he sighed. You're lucky to be alive. Others weren't so fortunate. I swallowed hard, the reality settling in. What happens now? Silas and his group are in custody. With your testimony, we can ensure they won't see the light of day for a long time. Glad to hear it, I replied, meaning it. He gave a small nod. If you remember anything else, give me a call. He handed me his card. After he left, I started packing up. The allure of the wilderness had lost its shine. As I secured the last of my gear, I noticed something tucked under the windshield wiper. A small folded piece of parchment. Heart pounding, I unfolded it to reveal a hand-drawn symbol. A triangle entwined with a serpent. Below it, scrawled in elegant script, were the words, "This isn't over." I scanned the tree line but saw nothing. Not willing to stick around to find out, I jumped into the driver's seat and fired up the engine. The RV roared to life, and I peeled out of the campsite faster than any posted speed limit would approve. The drive back was a blur. Every so often, I checked the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that beat-up pickup or a convoy of cloaked figures tailing me. But the road remained empty, save for the occasional semi-truck. Back in Chicago, life returned to a semblance of normalcy. I threw myself into work, using design projects as a distraction. But curiosity gnawed at me. Who exactly was Silas Crowley, and how had he managed to evade capture for so long? One night, unable to sleep, I dove into the depths of the internet. Articles, forum posts, and obscure websites painted a disturbing picture. Silas had been linked to mysterious disappearances across several states, always near remote areas. His followers were zealots, believing in some twisted form of immortality achieved through rituals involving unwitting participants. I came across a photo from an old university yearbook. There he was, clean-shaven, eyes sharp but not yet clouded by madness. A far cry from the scarred visage that haunted my memories. Beneath the photo was a list of his published works. One title stood out: Transcendence Through Sacrifice, an Anthropological Perspective. I clicked on a link leading to an abstract. It detailed ancient practices meant to bridge the gap between the mortal and the divine, often requiring a human conduit. Chillingly, it argued that such rituals were not acts of barbarism but profound spiritual endeavors. A notification popped up, a new email. Odd, considering the hour. The subject line read, "We will meet again." I hesitated before opening it. The message contained only a single image, the same symbol of the triangle and serpent. My stomach twisted. How did they find me? My mind raced. I hadn't given anyone my contact information, and the police assured me that all members were accounted for. Except, perhaps, they weren't. Determined not to be a sitting duck, I reached out to the officer who had helped me, Detective Marcus Lee. His number went straight to voicemail. I left a message explaining the email and urged him to call me back. Days passed with no response. Then, a news report caught my attention. Detective Marcus Lee had been found dead in his home, the victim of an apparent suicide. But the details didn't add up. No note, no history of depression, just a decorated officer who suddenly took his own life. I knew better. Feeling cornered, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I wasn't about to let these people control my life. If they wanted a game of cat and mouse, I'd show them I wasn't easy prey. I revisited the forums, digging deeper into the network of connections surrounding Silas. A pattern emerged. The locations of past rituals formed a rough circle on the map, with Chicago unsettlingly close to the center. Late one night, my apartment buzzer sounded. Cautiously, I approached the intercom. "Who is it?" No response, just static. Then a voice whispered, "Time to complete the ritual, Donovan." Panic surged, but I steeled myself. "Funny, I was just thinking the same thing," I muttered. I hung up and grabbed the baseball bat I kept by the door, a relic from my high school days, more for nostalgia than anything else, but solid wood nonetheless. The hallway was quiet as I stepped out, scanning for any movement. The elevator dinged, and the doors slid open to reveal a cloaked figure. Without waiting, I charged, swinging the bat with every ounce of fear and rage pent up inside me. The figure dodged, but not fast enough. The bat connected with a sickening thud, and he crumpled to the ground. I pulled back the hood to reveal a young man, eyes wide with shock. He wasn't Silas, but he wore the same symbol around his neck. Footsteps echoed from the stairwell. More were coming. I dashed back into my apartment, locking the door and wedging a chair under the handle. My mind raced. They weren't going to stop unless I stopped them. That's when an idea struck me. Rushing to my computer, I accessed the security system controls for the building. A perk of designing the software for the management company. I activated the fire alarm, triggering an automatic call to the fire department and unlocking all exit doors. Within minutes, the halls filled with blaring sirens and the stomping of residents evacuating. The cult members would be lost in the chaos, their anonymity stripped away. I joined the crowd heading downstairs, blending in. Outside, fire trucks arrived and firefighters began their sweep. I spotted a few cloaked figures slipping away into the night but didn't pursue them. The police arrived shortly after. I gave my statement, omitting certain details to avoid sounding like a lunatic. They assured me they'd investigate. Exhausted, I checked into a hotel under an alias. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by fragmented dreams. The next morning, a news alert pinged on my phone. Notorious cult leader Silas Crowley found dead in apparent ritual suicide. The article detailed how he was discovered in an abandoned warehouse, surrounded by symbols and paraphernalia. A sense of relief washed over me, tempered by skepticism. It seemed too convenient. A knock at the door startled me. I peered through the peephole to see a woman in a business suit holding a badge. "Mr. Huxley, FBI, we need to talk." I opened the door cautiously. "How did you find me?" "We have our ways," she replied curtly. "May I come in?" I nodded, stepping aside. She sat down, fixing me with a piercing gaze. "Silas Crowley is dead, but his followers are still at large. We believe you're a target." "Tell me something I don't know," I sighed. We can offer you protection, but we need full cooperation. I considered her offer. Fine. What do you need? Everything you know about the cult's operations, contacts you've made, any information that could help us dismantle what's left. For the next several hours, I recounted every detail from the campsite to the emails. As I spoke, a thought nagged at me. If Silas is dead, who sent the email? She paused. That's what we're trying to figure out. His second in command, Lydia Marks, is just as dangerous, if not more. Not entirely. With your help, we can set a trap. Use me as bait? She met my gaze steadily. Essentially. I leaned back, weighing my options. Running hadn't worked, and hiding was a temporary fix at best. All right, let's do it. Plans were set. I was to resume my normal life under surveillance. Days passed without incident. I almost began to believe the nightmare was over. Then, one evening, as I returned home, the lights flickered ominously. The air felt heavy. Showtime, I muttered. I entered cautiously. The living room was empty, but a faint sound came from the bedroom, a soft chanting. I signaled discreetly, hoping the agents were monitoring. Pushing the door open, I found Lydia standing by the window, silhouetted against the city lights. Welcome home, Donovan, she purred. Can't say I was expecting guests. She smiled coldly. Silas underestimated you. I won't make the same mistake. Funny, I was just thinking the same thing about you cult types. She stepped forward. Join us willingly, and your transition will be painless. Tempting, but I'll pass. She lunged, but before she could reach me, agents burst in, weapons drawn. Freeze! Lydia's eyes flashed with fury. In a swift motion, she pulled a knife from her sleeve. Shots rang out, and she collapsed, the blade clattering to the floor. As they secured the scene, I stood there, a whirlwind of emotions swirling but none taking hold. The agent from before approached. It's over, I nodded. Is it? She gave a half smile. For now. Weeks later, life settled into a new normal. The emails stopped and the surveillance was lifted. The FBI assured me the cult had been dismantled. One evening, as I sorted through my mail, I found an unmarked envelope. Inside was a photograph of Silas and Lydia standing in front of a farmhouse, with me in the background, unaware. Scrawled on the back were the words, "See you soon." I stared at it, a mix of dread and resignation. Maybe the cycle wasn't broken, but at least I knew what I was up against. In that moment, I realized Silas Crowley wasn't just a man, but the embodiment of an idea, one that wouldn't die easily. But neither would I. My name is Mulligan, and this story happened to me in the summer of 2010. I was a camp counselor at Camp Pinewood, nestled in the heart of the Adirondacks. I've always loved the outdoors, and this job was my dream gig, spending the summer hiking, canoeing, and hanging out with kids. I grew up in a small town in upstate New York, so the woods felt like home. Plus, I needed the extra cash to help pay for my college tuition. Little did I know that this summer would be anything but ordinary. Camp Pinewood had been around since the 1920s, a sprawling piece of land with cabins, a mess hall, and a big lake where we taught the kids to swim and canoe. It was a beautiful place, full of towering pines and the smell of fresh pine needles. The camp was split into boys and girls sections, each with its own set of counselors. I was in charge of Cabin 6, a group of 12-year-old boys who were more interested in causing mischief than anything else. My fellow counselors were a mixed bunch. There was Cody, who was a year older than me and acted like he owned the place. Jenny, the arts and crafts counselor with a perpetual smile, and Andy, the quiet guy who played guitar by the campfire every night. We were a tight-knit group, and after the kids went to bed, we'd sit around, share stories, drink a couple of beers we kept hidden, and just enjoy the calm of the forest night. One night, after a particularly exhausting day of wrangling the kids through a hike up to Lookout Point, we gathered around the fire. The stars were out in full force, and the only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the occasional hoot of an owl. Andy started strumming his guitar, playing a soft tune that made the woods feel even more magical. As we were talking, Cody mentioned something about the old stories the local townsfolk used to tell. They say these woods are haunted, you know, he said, his eyes glinting in the firelight. Haunted? Jenny scoffed. By what? Ghosts of campers who didn't clean their cabins? Nah, Cody replied, leaning in. There's this old legend about a hermit who used to live around here. They say he went crazy, started kidnapping people and taking them to his cabin deep in the woods. No one ever found the cabin, though. I laughed, shaking my head. Come on, Cody. You expect us to believe that? Sounds like a story you tell to scare the new counselors. Andy stopped playing his guitar and looked up. I've heard that story, too. My grandpa used to tell it to me when I was a kid. He swore it was true. We all sat in silence for a moment, the crackling fire the only sound. Then Jenny broke the tension with a laugh. Well, if I see any hermits tonight, I'll be sure to ask for directions to his cabin. The next few days went by without incident. We kept the kids busy with activities and didn't think much about Cody's story. But then, weird things started happening. It began with small stuff. Tools missing from the shed, food disappearing from the mess hall. At first, we thought it was just the kids playing pranks. But then, one night, one of the girls from Cabin 3 went missing. Her name was Lila, a sweet kid, a bit on the shy side. Her bunkmates said they saw her go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, but she never came back. We searched the entire camp, calling her name, our flashlights cutting through the darkness, but there was no sign of her. By dawn, we had to call the local authorities. The police showed up, just a couple of officers with stern faces and serious attitudes. They combed the area and asked us a million questions, but they didn't find anything either. It was like she had vanished into thin air. The camp directors decided to keep the camp running, hoping Lila would turn up, but the atmosphere had changed. The kids were on edge, and so were we. At night, the woods seemed darker, the sounds more ominous. We kept a closer eye on our campers, never letting them wander off alone. A few nights later, I was on night duty, making sure the boys were asleep and everything was in order. Around midnight, I heard something outside, a rustling noise, like someone moving through the underbrush. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the cabin, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. "Who's there?" I called out, shining the light around. The beam cut through the darkness, but I didn't see anything. The noise had stopped. I stood there for a minute, listening, but all I could hear was the chirping of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. I was about to head back inside when I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a shadow moving between the trees. It was quick, barely there for a second, but it was enough to send a chill down my spine. The next morning, I told Cody and the others about it. They were skeptical, but Cody seemed intrigued. "Maybe it's the hermit," he said with a grin. "Or maybe Lila." "Not funny, Cody," Jenny snapped. "This is serious. We need to figure out what's going on." We decided to set up a watch system, taking turns staying up at night to keep an eye on things. It was exhausting, but we didn't want to take any chances. The kids needed to be safe. One night, it was my turn again. I was sitting by the fire, the only light in the darkness, when I heard it, the same rustling noise from before. This time, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward the sound, my heart pounding in my chest. As I got closer, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure hunched over, moving slowly through the trees. I shone the light on it, and for a brief moment I saw a face, wild eyes, unkempt hair, and a look of sheer madness. Then it was gone, disappearing into the darkness. I ran back to the cabin, my mind racing. I knew I had to tell the others. We needed to find this person, whoever they were, and make sure they didn't harm anyone else. The next day, we organized a search party. The police were already involved, but we couldn't just sit around and wait. Cody, Andy, and I, along with a couple of other counselors, headed into the woods, determined to find the source of the strange occurrences. We split up into pairs, each taking a different direction. Andy and I headed east, following a narrow trail that led deeper into the forest. The farther we went, the quieter it got, the sounds of the camp fading away. After about an hour of walking, we stumbled upon something that made my stomach churn. An old, dilapidated cabin hidden behind a thick curtain of vines and moss. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years, but there were fresh footprints in the dirt leading up to the door. Andy and I exchanged a glance. "This has to be it," he whispered. We approached cautiously, our flashlights illuminating the decaying wood and broken windows. The door was slightly ajar, creaking as we pushed it open. Inside, the air was stale, filled with the smell of rot and mildew. As we stepped inside, our flashlights revealed a scene straight out of a nightmare. Old furniture covered in dust, walls lined with strange symbols and drawings, and in the corner, a pile of clothes and blankets that looked like a makeshift bed. And then we saw her, Lila. She was lying on the floor, pale and unmoving. My heart sank. We rushed to her side, but it was too late. She was gone. We heard a noise behind us and turned to see the figure from the woods standing in the doorway, a crazed look in his eyes. He was holding a knife, his hand shaking as he stared at us. "Why did you come here?" he snarled. "This is my home." "You shouldn't have come here." Andy and I backed away slowly, trying to keep our distance from the man. "We don't want any trouble," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We just want to leave." But the man didn't listen. He lunged at us, the knife glinting in the flashlight beam. Andy managed to dodge out of the way, but I wasn't so lucky. The knife caught me in the arm and I cried out in pain. Andy grabbed a broken piece of wood from the floor and swung it at the man, hitting him in the side. The man stumbled, giving us a chance to make a run for it. We bolted out of the cabin, our hearts pounding as we raced back toward the camp. When we finally made it back, we were out of breath and covered in sweat. We told the others what had happened, and the police were called in immediately. They found the cabin and the man, who turned out to be a local who had gone off the grid years ago. He was arrested and taken away, but the damage had already been done. The camp was shut down early that summer. The parents were notified, and the kids were sent home. It was a somber end to what was supposed to be a fun and carefree time. Lila's family was devastated, and the rest of us were left with the haunting memories of what had happened. I still think about that summer sometimes, especially when I'm out in the woods. The forest doesn't feel as safe as it used to, and I can't shake the image of that man's wild eyes. But life goes on. I'm back in college now, studying to be a teacher. Maybe one day I'll work at a camp again, but for now I'm content to stick to the classroom. As for Camp Pinewood, it's still there, abandoned and overgrown. Some say it's haunted by Lila's spirit, but I don't believe in ghosts. What happened that summer was real, and that's enough to keep me away. Looking back, I realize how close we all came to a far worse outcome. It makes me appreciate the little things more, like a quiet night or a simple walk in the park. Life is fragile and it can change in an instant, but it also goes on, and we have to find a way to move forward, no matter how dark the past might be.